Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey that spans thousands of years, a journey that starts in darkness, in fear, in the coldest nights humanity has ever known. Imagine standing in the middle of winter, watching the sun disappear earlier each day, wondering, will it ever come back? Will spring return? Or is this the year the light dies forever? Now, imagine your answer to that fear was a tree. Not just any tree, an evergreen, a tree that refused to die, a tree that whispered a promise. Life will return. Tonight, we're uncovering the ancient pagan roots of something you see every December, the Christmas tree. And trust me, this story is far older, far stranger, and far more beautiful than you ever imagined. So before we step into the sacred forests of our ancestors together, I have a small favor to ask. If you find yourself captivated by what you're about to hear, if a moment makes you pause, makes you think, or simply makes you feel something, would you consider subscribing to this channel? Maybe hit that like button, or leave a comment sharing where you are right now, what time it is, and what brought you here tonight. I read every single one, and honestly, they make my day. But please, only if it feels right, only if this story speaks to you. Now, let's dim the lights. Let the world outside fade away and travel back in time, back to when the evergreen was not decoration. It was survival. It was hope. It was magic. Picture this. It's December 21st, somewhere around 3,000 years ago. You're standing in what we now call Northern Europe, maybe Germany, maybe Scandinavia, maybe ancient Britain. The sun has been setting earlier and earlier for months now. Today it will barely climb above the horizon before sinking back into darkness. This is the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. And if you're an ancient human with no understanding of astronomy, no calendar to promise the sun's return, this day is terrifying. You see, to our ancestors, the sun wasn't just a ball of gas in the sky. It was a god. It was life itself. And every year, as autumn turned to winter, that god seemed to be dying. Each day grew shorter. Each night grew longer and colder. The crops were dead. The animals had vanished or been slaughtered for food that might not last until spring. The world was a graveyard of brown, grey and white. But then, you'd walk through the forest, your breath freezing in the air, and you'd see them. Pine trees, fir trees, spruce trees, still green, still alive, still vibrant against the dead world around them. While everything else surrendered to winter's grasp, these trees stood defiant, immortal, eternal. Can you imagine how magical that must have seemed? How impossible. To the ancient Egyptians, evergreens were so sacred they brought palm branches into their temples during the winter solstice to honor Ra, the sun god. They believed these green plants could persuade the sun to return, to regain its strength. It wasn't just decoration, it was a prayer made physical. The ancient Romans took this even further. During their week-long festival called Saturnalia, celebrated from December 17th to the 24th, they decorated everything with evergreen boughs. Temples, homes, public buildings. They wore wreaths of pine and holly in their hair. They exchanged gifts beneath branches of fir and spruce. Saturnalia was wild, by the way. I'm talking about a festival so chaotic that for 1 week, no one could be prosecuted for anything. Theft, violence, even, well, let's just say people took full advantage of the temporary lawlessness. But beneath all that revelry was something deeper. Gratitude. Gratitude that Saturn, the god of agriculture, had blessed them with a harvest, and hope that he would do it again. But here's what fascinates me most. These weren't isolated traditions. All across the ancient world, from Egypt to Rome to the frozen forests of Scandinavia, human beings independently came to the same conclusion: evergreens are sacred. The Norse people of Northern Europe celebrated Yule, a 12-day festival centered around the winter solstice. And those 12 days were significant. According to Norse mythology, this was the darkest, most dangerous time of the entire year. Why? Because Odin, the king of their gods, would ride through the sky during these nights with something called the Wild Hunt, a terrifying procession of spirits and demons concealed by storm clouds and darkness. If you were caught outside during the Wild Hunt, legend said Odin himself might snatch you up into the sky, never to be seen again. So what did people do? They covered their homes with aromatic evergreens, pine, fir, spruce. They burned resin and smudged their walls with it. Why? Because they believed the strong scent and the life force of these trees could protect them, could keep the darkness at bay. The evergreen wasn't just a symbol of life, it was a shield against death itself. Think about that for a moment. Put yourself in the fur boots of a Norse farmer in the dead of winter. You're huddled in a small wooden home with your family. Outside, the wind howls. Snow piles against your door. The nights are so long and dark it feels like the sun might never return. And in that darkness, you believe, truly believe, that evil spirits and gods on horseback are hunting through the sky above you. So you hang branches of pine above your door, you lay spruce boughs along your windowsills, and in the flickering light of your fire, with that sharp, clean scent of evergreen filling your home, you feel just a little bit safer, a little more hopeful. Because if these trees can survive the killing cold, maybe you can too. The Celts, those mysterious people who inhabited ancient Britain and Ireland, believed something similar. To them, evergreens had magical properties because they stayed green all year. In a world where everything died in winter, flowers, grass, leaves, crops, the fact that pine and fir trees kept their needles seemed like witchcraft, like a gift from the gods. So they brought evergreen branches into their homes during the winter solstice to ward off evil spirits, to ward off sickness and death, and to encourage the sun's return. But here's something that should make you pause. Why? Why did all these different cultures, separated by thousands of miles and with no contact with each other, all arrive at the same tradition? Why did the Egyptians, the Romans, the Celts, the Norse, why did they all look at an evergreen tree and think, this is sacred, this is protective, this is hope? I think it's because these trees spoke to something deep in the human psyche, something primal. We fear darkness, we fear death, we fear that winter might last forever, and in that fear, we cling to anything that promises survival, anything that promises that life will return. The evergreen doesn't make promises with words, it makes them with persistence, with stubborn, beautiful, impossible greenness in the face of death. The ancient Slavic peoples spread across Eastern Europe had their own winter solstice festival called Karachun, a day dedicated to Chernobog, the black god of darkness and decay. It was similar to the Celtic Samhain, or what we now call Halloween. On this day, all the gods associated with darkness were believed to be at their most powerful. Death was close. The boundary between the living and the dead was thin. So what did people do? They lit fires. Lots of fires. In cemeteries, at crossroads, anywhere spirits might linger. They believed these fires would keep their dead loved ones warm during the long winter, and they decorated with evergreens, always evergreens, because if the black god had his day of power, the sun god would be resurrected the next day and triumph once again. The evergreen was proof of that cycle, proof that death is never permanent. that life always, always finds a way back. Now, I want you to really sit with this for a moment. Close your eyes if you're listening in the dark. Imagine you're one of these ancient people. You don't have central heating. You don't have electric lights. You don't have a calendar app telling you that yes, scientifically the days will start getting longer again after December 21st. You don't have grocery stores or supply chains ensuring you'll eat in February. All you have is faith. Faith in the gods. Faith in the cycles of nature. Faith that spring will return because it always has before. But what if this year is different? What if the sun god loses his battle against darkness? What if winter wins? That's real fear, existential fear, the kind of fear that makes you pray, makes you sacrifice, makes you hope with every fibre of your being. And in the middle of that fear, you bring a pine tree into your home, you hang its branches above your door, and for just a moment, as you breathe in that sharp, green, alive scent, you believe the sun will return. You believe you'll see spring again. You believe life is stronger than death. That's powerful. That's why the evergreen became sacred across so many cultures. It wasn't really about the tree at all. It was about what the tree represented. Resilience, endurance, the promise that darkness, no matter how deep, is temporary. The ancient Greeks had their own version too. They celebrated the birth of Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, during the winter solstice with 12 days of wild festivities. Sound familiar? Feasting, drinking, decorating with greenery. It's almost like there's a template here, isn't it? Almost like human beings across time and space needed the same things. Light in darkness, hope in despair, life in the face of death. And here's the beautiful irony that we'll explore deeper as our journey continues. Christianity, which would eventually adopt the Christmas tree as one of its most recognizable symbols, didn't invent any of this. Every single element, the date near the winter solstice, the evergreen trees, the lights, the gift-giving, the feasting, all of it existed long before Jesus was born. The pagans weren't primitive or superstitious fools. They were human beings trying to survive and find meaning in a world far harsher than anything most of us will ever experience. And they found that meaning in a tree that refused to die, a tree that whispered year after year, "Have faith, life returns, always." That's the DNA of the Christmas tree. That's where it begins. Not in a church, not in a Christian home, but in a dark forest thousands of years ago, where a terrified human being hung a branch of pine above their door and dared to hope for spring. So the next time you see a Christmas tree, whether it's in your living room, at a shopping mall, or lit up in the center of a city, remember, you're looking at one of humanity's oldest symbols, a symbol that predates Christmas by millennia, a symbol that connects you to ancient Egyptians praising Ra, to Roman citizens celebrating Saturnalia, to Norse families hiding from the wild hunt, to Celtic druids blessing the winter solstice. You're looking at humanity's first answer to darkness. We will survive. We will endure. We will be green again. But here's the question that launches us into our next chapter. How did this pagan symbol, this tree soaked in polytheistic ritual and winter magic, become the centerpiece of the world's largest Christian holiday? How did followers of Jesus Christ, who supposedly came to abolish pagan practices, end up adopting the very same traditions they once condemned? That story involves strategic bishops, loopholes in theology, a famous saint with an axe, and one of the most brilliant propaganda moves in religious history. Because Christianity didn't conquer the Christmas tree, it rebranded it. And the way they pulled that off? Well, that's a masterclass in cultural appropriation that still echoes today, but that's where we're headed next. So here's where the story takes a fascinating turn, a turn that's part strategy, part survival, and part, well, let's just say, creative reinterpretation. Because what Christianity did with the Christmas tree and all those pagan winter traditions wasn't destruction. It was something far more clever, something that would shape the next 2,000 years of human culture. Let me set the scene for you. It's the year 400 AD. The Roman Empire has officially adopted Christianity. Suddenly, the religion that was once persecuted, that once hid in catacombs and secret gatherings, is now the law of the land. Temples to Jupiter and Saturn are being torn down. Pagan priests are losing their power. The old gods are, well, they're supposed to be dead. But here's the problem. The people aren't cooperating. See, you can change laws. You can change official religion. You can even change what people say they believe. But changing what people feel, what they've done every winter for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, that's a lot harder. Imagine you're a Roman citizen in the year 400. Your great-great-great-grandparents celebrated Saturnalia. Your parents celebrated Saturnalia. You grew up waiting all year for that magical week in December, when the world turned upside down, when you decorated your home with evergreen boughs, when you feasted and gave gifts and felt the sun god's power returning. That's not just a holiday, that's your identity. That's your connection to your ancestors, to your community, to the rhythm of the year itself. And now some Christian bishop is telling you it's all forbidden, evil, demonic. Yeah, that's not going to work. So the early Christian church faced a dilemma. They could fight these deeply ingrained traditions, try to stamp them out completely, punish anyone who celebrated the old ways. Some tried exactly that. Or they could do something smarter, something that would prove to be one of the most successful cultural strategies in human history. They could rebrand. Enter Pope Gregory I, later known as Gregory the Great. This man was brilliant. In the year 601 AD, he wrote a letter that would change everything. The letter was addressed to Saint Augustine, not the famous philosopher from North Africa, but Augustine of Canterbury, the missionary trying to convert the Anglo-Saxons in Britain. And in this letter, Gregory laid out a strategy that was, honestly, kind of genius. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Don't destroy the pagan temples. Don't tear down their sacred sites. Instead, repurpose them. If they worship at a sacred spring, build a church next to it. If they have a sacred grove, bless it and dedicate it to a Christian saint. If they celebrate a festival on a certain day, let them keep celebrating. Just change what they're celebrating." Can you see what he's doing here? He's not fighting human nature, he's redirecting it. He's saying, keep your parties, keep your decorations, keep your dates. Just aim all the energy at Jesus instead of Saturn. It's psychological warfare, but like the nice kind, and it worked. Oh, did it work? Let's talk about December 25th. Because here's a fact that might surprise you. There's virtually no evidence that Jesus was actually born on December 25th. Biblical scholars, using clues from the Gospel of Luke about shepherds in the fields, generally place his birth sometime in spring or early autumn, probably September. December 25th doesn't appear in any of the earliest Christian writings about Jesus' birth. So why December 25th? Well, that just happened to be right after the winter solstice, right in the middle of Saturnalia. Right when Romans were celebrating Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, a festival that honoured the sun god's triumph over winter darkness. Coincidence? The early church leaders were smart enough to know that if you tell people they can't celebrate on the days they've always celebrated, they'll just ignore you. But if you give them permission to celebrate, with just a tiny theological tweak, suddenly everyone's happy. The pagans get to keep their party. The Christians get to claim a victory for their religion. Win-win. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because not everyone in the early church was on board with this strategy. Origen of Alexandria, one of the most respected Christian theologians of the 3rd century, was furious about this kind of cultural mixing. He argued passionately that Christians shouldn't celebrate Christ's birth on a pagan festival day. He actually wrote, and this is a real quote, "It is only sinners like Pharaoh and Herod who celebrate their birthdays." Origen lost that argument. Badly. Because by the 4th century the Church had officially designated December 25th as Christmas, literally Christ's Mass, and they started encouraging people to bring their old pagan traditions into this new Christian context. That sacred evergreen tree that used to honour the sun god, now it can honour the Son of God. See what they did there? Same celebration, different explanation. Now, let's talk about a man who became central to the Christmas tree mythology, Saint Boniface. His story is, well, it's probably more legend than history, but it reveals so much about how Christianity approached pagan traditions. The story goes like this. In the 8th century, around 724 AD, Boniface, an English missionary, was travelling through what's now Germany, trying to convert the pagan Germanic tribes to Christianity. One winter evening, he came upon a group of pagans gathered around a massive oak tree, an oak sacred to Thor, the thunder god. And these pagans weren't just worshipping the tree, they were preparing to sacrifice a young boy named Olaf to appease Thor. Boniface, according to the legend, was horrified. He grabbed an axe and chopped down the oak tree, and the pagans, expecting Thor to strike him dead with lightning, watched as nothing happened. Thor didn't show up. The tree just fell. And here's where it gets magical. From the roots of that fallen oak, a small fir tree supposedly sprouted right before everyone's eyes. Boniface pointed to this evergreen and declared, "This tree, which stays green all year and points toward heaven, will be your new holy tree. This represents Christ, eternal, pointing us toward God." Now, did this actually happen? Probably not with quite that much drama. But the story spread, and whether true or not, it perfectly captures the strategy. Replace pagan symbols with Christian ones. Same tree, different God. But not everyone went along quietly. In the 3rd century, Origen wasn't the only one resisting. Many early Christians were deeply uncomfortable with what they saw as compromise. They worried, and maybe they were right to worry, that by adopting pagan traditions, Christianity would lose its distinct identity. That it would become just another version of the old religions with a fresh coat of paint. And you know what? They had a point. Because if you really look at Christmas traditions today, the evergreen trees, the lights, the gift-giving, the feasting, the date itself, almost none of it comes from the Bible or early Christian practice. It's all borrowed, all repurposed, all rebranded paganism. Is that wrong? I don't know. I think it depends on your perspective. From a religious purity standpoint, yeah, it's messy. But from a human standpoint, it's beautiful. Because what it shows is that humans across all cultures and religions need the same things: light in darkness, hope in winter, connection with each other, reasons to celebrate. Christianity didn't destroy those needs. It found a way to fulfill them while teaching its own message. Here's something else fascinating. This strategy of cultural appropriation worked so well that it became Christianity's primary method of spreading across Europe. When missionaries arrived in a new land, they didn't try to erase local customs, they Christianized them. The Celtic festival of Samhain became All Saints' Day. The Germanic goddess Eostra's spring festival became Easter. The Yule log became a Christian tradition. Mistletoe, holly, wreaths, all pagan, all absorbed, all given new Christian meanings. And people accepted it. Why? Because they got to keep doing what they'd always done. The emotional and cultural continuity remained intact. Grandma's winter solstice recipe became Grandma's Christmas recipe. Same cookies, different blessing. There's actually a brilliant psychological principle at work here, something modern marketers would kill to understand as well as those early church leaders did. People resist change, but they accept evolution. If you try to force someone to abandon their traditions entirely, they'll fight you. But if you let them keep the form of their traditions while gently shifting the meaning, they'll often follow along. Think about it in modern terms. Imagine if I tried to convince you to stop celebrating Christmas entirely. No tree, no gifts, no special dinner, nothing. You'd probably resist, right? Even if you're not particularly religious, even if you don't believe in the Christian story, you'd miss it. Because it's not really about theology for most people. It's about tradition, family, comfort, joy. But what if I said, keep doing everything you're doing, just dedicate it to something slightly different? That's much easier to accept. The early church understood this instinctively, and in many ways their success in spreading Christianity had less to do with converting people's beliefs, and more to do with respecting their emotional needs. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something. Do you think this was cynical manipulation? Or was it wise compassion? Were these church leaders being dishonest by cloaking pagan traditions in Christian language? Or were they being generous by letting people keep what they loved? I've thought about this a lot, and I honestly think it's both. It was strategic, yes. Calculated, absolutely. But it was also deeply human, because the alternative, forced conversion, destroyed traditions, cultural genocide, we've seen what that looks like throughout history. And it's ugly. What happened with the Christmas tree and other winter traditions was messy and complicated, but it was also a kind of cultural bridge building. It allowed different worldviews to coexist, to blend, to create something new while honouring something old. And here's the really beautiful part. The pagans knew what was happening. They weren't stupid. A Roman celebrating on December 25th in the year 500 AD knew perfectly well that his grandfather had called this Saturnalia and worshipped Saturn. But maybe he didn't mind. Maybe he liked having an excuse to keep celebrating. Maybe the name didn't matter as much as the feeling, the gathering of family, the light against darkness, the hope that spring would come again. Religion aside, that's what the Christmas tree has always represented. Hope. It doesn't matter if you're calling on Ra or Saturn or Odin or Christ. The tree means the same thing. Life persists. Light returns. We will survive the darkness. Christianity didn't invent that message, but they preserved it. They carried it forward. They gave it new language that allowed it to survive for 2 more millennia. So when you look at your Christmas tree this year, you're seeing layers of history, Egyptian palm fronds, Roman Saturnalia decorations, Norse Yule trees, Celtic solstice boughs, Christian reinterpretation, all of it, stacked up like rings in an ancient trunk, telling the story of human culture evolving, adapting, surviving. But here's where our story takes another turn, because it's one thing to rebrand a tradition theologically. It's another thing entirely to get people to actually do it in their homes. Because for hundreds of years after Christianity took over Europe, the Christmas tree remained mostly a pagan folk custom, something done in secret or in rural areas away from church authority. So how did it become mainstream? How did it go from forbidden pagan ritual to the centerpiece of Christian celebration? That journey involves medieval plays, band performances, secret decorations, and eventually a paradise lost. There's something deeply human about rebellion through ritual, about keeping alive the things we're told we can't have. And in medieval Europe, that's exactly what happened with the Christmas tree. It went underground. It became an act of quiet defiance, a secret kept in living rooms and hidden corners. But to understand how we got there, we need to talk about theatre. Yes, theatre. Because believe it or not, the Christmas tree as we know it today has its roots in drama class. Let me take you back to medieval Europe, anywhere from the 1200s to the 1400s. Christianity has been the dominant religion for centuries now. The church controls not just spiritual life but education, art, entertainment, everything. And the church has a problem. Most people can't read. The Bible is written in Latin, which the average person doesn't understand. So how do you teach biblical stories to illiterate peasants? You put on a show. These were called mystery plays or miracle plays, and they were spectacular. Imagine your town square transformed into the Garden of Eden, or the stable in Bethlehem, or the Red Sea parting. Actors in elaborate costumes, special effects. Well, medieval special effects, which meant lots of smoke and trapdoors, and stories that everyone could understand just by watching. And one of the most popular plays, the Paradise Play, the story of Adam and Eve. Now here's where it gets interesting. In the medieval church calendar, December 24th wasn't just Christmas Eve. It was also the feast day of Adam and Eve. Yes, really. The same day that would eventually become the celebration of Jesus' birth was also dedicated to humanity's first sin and fall from grace. The theology here is actually beautiful. Adam and Eve's fall created the need for a saviour, so celebrating them on the same day as Christ's birth emphasizes the whole redemption story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about these paradise plays. The centerpiece, literally, was the paradise tree. Since the play told the story of the Garden of Eden, they needed to represent the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what tree did they use? An evergreen, usually a fir tree. Why? Because in December in Europe it's the only tree that still has, leaves, or needles technically. And they would decorate this tree with apples, red, shiny apples hanging from green branches, representing the forbidden fruit that Eve took, that Adam ate, that changed everything for humanity. Can you picture it? The town square packed with people, children sitting on their parents' shoulders, the tree at the centre of the stage, apples gleaming in the winter light, and then the actors, someone playing God, someone playing the serpent with a costume that probably looked ridiculous but everyone pretended was terrifying, acting out this ancient story of temptation and consequence. These plays were huge social events. They were entertainment, education, and religious experience all rolled into one, and they happened every year right before Christmas. But then, the church got nervous. See, something weird started happening with these plays. They got a little too popular, a little too entertaining. People started coming more for the show than for the religious message. The plays got more elaborate, more theatrical. Actors started ad-libbing, adding jokes, making the stories more, let's say, earthly. And the crowds got rowdy, really rowdy. We're talking about medieval crowds here. People who didn't have Netflix or social media, or really any entertainment besides these annual performances. So they went hard, drinking, shouting, heckling the actors. The plays that were supposed to inspire piety started inspiring, well, parties. The church, predictably, was not amused. Starting in the 16th century, various church authorities began banning these public performances. They called them heathenry. They said the plays had become too secular, too disrespectful, too fun. The official line was that they distracted from true worship. The unofficial reason was probably that the church was losing control of the narrative. But here's the thing about humans. When you ban something people love, they don't just stop loving it. They find ways to keep it alive. So the paradise trees didn't disappear. They just moved indoors. Families in Germany, because yes, this is primarily a German story now, started setting up their own paradise trees in their homes, in secret, away from the church's watching eyes. They'd bring a small fir tree inside, decorate it with apples just like in the old plays, and some families even added round white wafers, representing communion, the Eucharist, redemption. Do you see what's happening here? The story of the fall and the story of salvation, all told through one decorated tree. It's brilliant, really. The apples represent sin, the wafers represent forgiveness, the evergreen itself represents eternal life. It's a whole theology lesson you can put in your living room, and it was completely unauthorized, completely grassroots, completely rebellious. I love this moment in history because it shows something essential about tradition. The church tried to control how people celebrated, tried to dictate what was acceptable and what wasn't, and the people just worked around them. Not violently, not dramatically, just quietly, in their own homes, they kept doing what mattered to them. These early indoor trees were called paradises, and they looked quite different from our modern Christmas trees. Imagine something more like a large branch or a small tree, hung with fruit and bread, maybe some flowers made of coloured paper. They weren't covered in lights. Candles were far too expensive and dangerous for most families. They weren't topped with stars or angels. They were simple, almost primitive, but they carried so much meaning. Now there's another element that emerged around this same time, the Christmas pyramid. This was a wooden structure, triangular like a pyramid, decorated with evergreen branches and often topped with a single candle. It represented, well, depending on who you ask, it represented either the mountain where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, or the light of Christ coming into the world, or just looked nice and people liked it. Some historians believe that the paradise tree and the Christmas pyramid eventually merged into what we now know as the Christmas tree. The structure of the pyramid combined with the symbolism and decoration of the paradise tree. Decorated branches, a tree-like shape, religious meaning, and eventually lights on top. It's like watching evolution happen, but with furniture. But I want to go back to something important here, the secrecy. Because for a long time, having a paradise tree in your home was risky. Not dangerous exactly. Nobody was getting executed for having a decorated fir tree. But it marked you as someone who clung to old traditions, someone who maybe didn't fully accept the church's authority. Imagine being a German family in, say, 1520. You've seen the Paradise plays as a child. Your parents saw them. Your grandparents saw them. It's part of your culture, your identity, your understanding of the Christmas story. And now suddenly it's banned, forbidden, declared inappropriate. What do? Do you just stop? Do you let that tradition die because some bishop hundreds of miles away decided it's not proper? Or do you bring a tree into your house, close the shutters, and decorate it anyway? I think most of us know what we'd choose, because traditions aren't just habits. They're connections to the past, to family, to meaning. They're how we understand who we are. And there's something beautiful about the image of a medieval German family gathered around their secret paradise tree on Christmas Eve, telling their children the story of Adam and Eve, explaining sin and redemption through apples and wafers and evergreen branches. No priests, No official church service, just a family, a tree, and a story passed down through generations. This is where the Christmas tree became personal. It moved from the public square into the private home, from official church performance to family tradition, from something you watched to something you did. And once that shift happened, once the tree became a domestic tradition rather than a public spectacle, it started evolving faster. Different families added different decorations. Some used nuts instead of apples. Some added ribbons or paper flowers. Some families hung cookies shaped like stars or angels. The tree was becoming customizable, personal, a canvas for each family's creativity and devotion. There's a record from Portugal, from the Alcobaça monastery, dated to the 1400s, that mentions what they called a Christmas branch. The instructions are wonderfully specific. On Christmas Eve you will look for a large branch of green laurel, and you shall reap many red oranges, and place them on the branches, and in every orange you shall put a candle, and hang the branch by a rope. So they're hanging a branch from the ceiling, decorating it with oranges with candles stuck in them, and letting it swing there like a chandelier of fruit and fire, which sounds both beautiful and like an absolutely terrible idea from a fire safety perspective. But hey, different times. This detail fascinates me because it shows that even within the church, even among monks who were supposed to be following official doctrine, people were adapting and creating their own versions of this tradition. It wasn't unified, it wasn't standardized, it was beautifully chaotic and personal. Now, what's crucial to understand is that for most of the medieval and early Renaissance period, these paradise trees remained a fairly regional tradition. This wasn't happening all across Europe. It was concentrated in Germany and parts of surrounding areas, what we'd now call parts of France, Switzerland, Austria. Why Germany specifically? That's a good question, and historians aren't entirely sure. But Germany at this time wasn't a unified country. It was hundreds of small kingdoms, principalities, and free cities, each with its own rules and its own level of church control. That fragmentation might have created pockets where traditions could survive that would have been stamped out in more centralized kingdoms. Also, Germany has a lot of evergreen forests. Access to fir trees was easy. You could just walk into the woods and cut a branch. No big deal. But here's what I find most moving about this whole chapter of the story. These families keeping paradise trees in their homes weren't trying to rebel against Christianity. They weren't pagans holding on to forbidden rituals. They were Christians, deeply faithful Christians, who had found a way to tell the most important story of their faith in a way that felt real and tangible. The church might have banned the public plays, but they couldn't ban meaning. They couldn't ban people's need to make their faith visible, touchable, part of their daily lives. And maybe that's the lesson here. Traditions survive not because they're protected by institutions, but because they meet human needs that institutions often can't. The need for beauty, for ritual, for something to do with your faith, not just believe. The paradise tree gave families that, a way to participate in the Christmas story, not just hear about it. But these trees were still relatively rare, still somewhat secret, still very much a German thing. So how did they break out? How did they go from forbidden folk custom to accepted Christian tradition to eventually, and this is the wild part, to secular global phenomenon? That transformation required something the medieval world didn't have: celebrity endorsement. It required someone with enough influence, enough visibility, enough star power to make the Christmas tree not just acceptable, but fashionable. And that someone, or rather, those someones, were about to enter our story. But first they needed a myth, a legend, An origin story so beautiful that it would erase all those centuries of ambiguity and controversy and claim the Christmas tree for Christianity once and for all. Enter a monk with a vision, a walk through a winter forest, and a story about stars. Every culture needs its creation myths. Every tradition needs that perfect origin story, the moment when everything began, told so beautifully that it becomes more real than reality itself. And the Christmas tree? Well, it got one of the best origin stories ever told. A story so charming, so poetic, so perfect, that it's almost certainly not true. But sometimes, the most interesting question isn't whether a story is true, it's why we want it to be true. The year is supposedly 1536. The place, a forest somewhere in Germany. The man, Martin Luther, the monk who just shattered the Catholic Church, who nailed his 95 theses to a door and started the Protestant Reformation, who changed the course of Western civilization. And according to legend, Martin Luther is walking home one winter evening. Maybe he's been preparing a sermon, maybe he's been visiting parishioners. The details vary depending on who's telling the story, but the core remains the same. Luther is walking through the forest. It's dark, it's cold, it's Christmas Eve, or close to it. And he looks up through the evergreen trees, the firs and the pines, and he sees something that stops him in his tracks. Stars, thousands of them, glittering through the branches like diamonds scattered across black velvet. These starlight filtering through the needles, creating this impossibly beautiful pattern of light and shadow and green and dark. And Luther, in that moment, is overwhelmed. He thinks about the stars that guided the shepherds to baby Jesus. He thinks about light coming into darkness. He thinks about heaven breaking through to earth. And he wants, no, he needs, to share this with his family, to recreate this moment of transcendent beauty for his wife and children. So he goes home, finds a small fir tree, brings it into his house, and decorates it with candles, little flames representing the stars above, transforming this simple tree into a piece of heaven brought indoors. His children gather around, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. Catherine, his wife, probably thinking this is a lovely gesture, but also mentally calculating the fire risk. And Luther tells them that this tree, this light, this moment, it's all about Christ. The evergreen representing eternal life, the candles representing the Star of Bethlehem. The whole thing a beautiful theological lesson wrapped in wonder. It's a perfect story, absolutely perfect, visual, emotional, spiritual. It connects the Christmas tree directly to Martin Luther, one of the most important figures in Christian history. It gives the tradition a Christian origin that bypasses all that messy pagan stuff. It's poetic, it's memorable, it's exactly the kind of story that makes you say, oh, that's where Christmas trees came from. There's just one tiny problem. It's almost certainly fiction. Now, before you feel betrayed, before you start questioning everything you've ever been told about Christmas, let me say this. The fact that it's probably not true doesn't make it unimportant. In fact, the story's power is precisely because it's the story we needed, not necessarily the story that happened. Let's dig into the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. The earliest documented reference to this Martin Luther story dates to, well, nobody's entirely sure, but it's probably sometime in the 1800s. That's 300 years after Luther supposedly did this. 3 centuries of zero mention in any of Luther's own writings, any contemporary accounts, any letters from his wife or colleagues. Now, Martin Luther was not a modest man. He wrote constantly. Letters, essays, theological treatises, hymns, rants about his digestive problems. Yes, really, There are letters where Luther complains extensively about constipation. The man documented everything, so if he'd invented the tradition of putting candles on Christmas trees, if he'd had this beautiful mystical experience in the forest, don't you think he would have mentioned it at least once? But there's nothing. Not in Luther's lifetime, not for centuries after. The first actual documented evidence of candles on Christmas trees comes from 1660. And it's not from Luther's household. It's just a passing mention from Germany that says essentially, yeah, people are putting candles on their Christmas trees now. No origin story, no legendary monk, just, it's a thing people do. And there's earlier evidence that German bakers were decorating trees with ornaments and treats as far back as 1419. That's 65 years before Luther was even born. So if Luther didn't invent the Christmas tree tradition, why do we have this elaborate story about him doing exactly that? Because we needed it. Or rather, the Reformation needed it. Think about the context. The Protestant Reformation was trying to separate itself from Catholic practices, from what reformers saw as pagan-influenced traditions that had corrupted pure Christianity. They wanted to get back to biblical basics, to strip away centuries of accumulated rituals and customs. But here's the problem. People loved their Christmas trees, especially in Germany, where Protestantism was strongest. The very people who were embracing Luther's theological reforms didn't want to give up their winter traditions. So somebody, we don't know who, came up with a brilliant solution. Attribute the Christmas tree to Luther himself. Make it a Protestant tradition. Give it a respectable Christian origin story that doesn't involve pagan winter solstice festivals or banned medieval plays. It's the same strategy the early church used with December 25th. Rebrand the tradition by giving it a new backstory. And it worked. By the 1800s, the Martin Luther Christmas tree story was everywhere. German Protestants embraced it enthusiastically. It became the official explanation taught to children. And because it was such a good story, because it touched something deep in people's imagination, it spread far beyond Germany. Even today, if you ask most people where the Christmas tree tradition started, they'll probably mention Martin Luther. The legend has become more powerful than the history. But here's what I find fascinating. Martin Luther might not have invented the candlelit Christmas tree, but he did something arguably more important. He created a theological and cultural space where such traditions could flourish. Luther believed in making faith accessible. He translated the Bible into German so ordinary people could read it. He wrote hymns in German so people could sing their faith, instead of just listening to Latin chants they didn't understand. He emphasized personal relationship with God over institutional ritual. And whether or not he personally put candles on a tree, his whole movement encouraged families to practice their faith at home, in their own ways, with their own creativity. So in a sense, even if Luther never touched a Christmas tree, the Christmas tree is still a Lutheran idea. It's about bringing the sacred into the domestic, making theology tangible, turning doctrine into something you can see and touch and gather around with your children. The paradise trees we talked about earlier, they thrived in Protestant regions. Why? Because Protestant families, encouraged to read and interpret scripture themselves, wanted visual aids for teaching their children. They wanted their homes to be sites of religious education, not just churches. The Christmas tree fit perfectly into that vision. Now, let's talk about what we do know happened in the 1500s, whether Luther was involved or not. We know that the practice of bringing decorated evergreen trees into homes became increasingly common in German-speaking regions. We know that by the late 1500s, there are records of guilds and civic organizations setting up decorated trees in public spaces. In 1539, there's a record of a Christmas tree in Strasbourg Cathedral. Yes, in a church, officially. We know that decorations evolved. Apples remained popular, representing the paradise tree tradition. But people added paper roses, symbolizing Mary. They added communion wafers, representing the Eucharist. They added nuts and cookies and sweets, practical ornaments that doubled as treats for children. And yes, some wealthy families started adding candles. Not many, candles were expensive and the fire risk was real. But enough that the image of the candlelit tree began to take hold in the cultural imagination. There's a radio broadcast from 1959, World Vision, that tells a version of the Luther story I find particularly touching. It says that Luther brought the evergreen into his home during a cold, dark winter to encourage his wife and children, that the evergreen represented God's eternal love and the steadfastness of their faith, that the candles represented the Star of Bethlehem leading the wise men to Christ. Even if this didn't happen exactly as described, it captures something true about what the Christmas tree meant to people. It was comfort. It was hope. It was a way of saying, even in the darkest, coldest time of year, there's light, there's life, there's something to celebrate. And maybe that's why the Martin Luther story persists. Not because it's historically accurate, but because it expresses an emotional truth. Because it captures what the Christmas tree does for people, even if it doesn't accurately describe where it came from. You know what? I think we do this with a lot of traditions. We create origin stories that reflect our values, our hopes, our understanding of what the tradition means, even if those stories don't reflect what actually happened. Think about Thanksgiving, the traditional American story of pilgrims and Native Americans sharing a harmonious feast. That's, let's say, heavily edited. But the story persists because it represents what we want Thanksgiving to mean: gratitude, community, coming together across differences. The truth is messier. Always. History is messy. Traditions evolve through accident and conflict and cultural mixing and individual creativity and 1,000 small choices by forgotten people. But stories are clean. Stories have heroes and clear meanings and satisfying narratives. And the Martin Luther Christmas tree story, it's a great story. A monk walking through the forest, stars through the trees, a moment of divine inspiration, a gift of beauty to his family. It's cinematic, it's touching, it gives the Christmas tree a noble birth. The real story, Germanic peoples adapting pagan winter solstice traditions through medieval church plays that got banned, so families started decorating trees in secret until eventually it became acceptable, and then someone started adding candles, and it all slowly coalesced into a recognizable tradition over several centuries. That's harder to put on a Christmas card. So we tell the Luther story, and honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as long as we know what we're doing, as long as we understand that the story serves a purpose beyond historical accuracy. It gives us a narrative, it gives us meaning, it connects us to something larger than ourselves. But here's what I want you to take away from this. Whether or not Martin Luther put candles on a Christmas tree, real human beings did. German families in the 1600s and 1700s did start decorating evergreen trees with lights. They did gather around them on Christmas Eve. They did tell their children that the lights represented stars, represented hope, represented the light of Christ coming into a dark world. Those moments happened. Those families existed. Those candles were lit year after year, generation after generation. The Christmas tree didn't need Martin Luther to exist. It was already growing, already spreading, already evolving. What it needed was time and space to develop. and eventually it needed something else, something that would transform it from a regional German custom into a global phenomenon. It needed fashion. It needed celebrity. It needed someone so famous, so influential, so widely admired that when they put up a Christmas tree, the entire world would want one too. It needed royalty. But not just any royalty. It needed a queen who understood the power of image, a prince who remembered his German childhood, and one very carefully orchestrated engraving that would change Christmas forever. That moment is coming. But first we need to understand what German Christmas culture looked like at its peak, before it broke out into the wider world. Because by the 1700s and early 1800s, in Germany, the Christmas tree wasn't a novelty or a rebellion anymore. It was tradition. It was identity. It was culture. And that's what would eventually conquer the world. What makes something more than just a custom? What transforms a practice into an identity? Something so deeply woven into who you are that you can't imagine life without it. For Germans in the 1700s and early 1800s, the Christmas tree crossed that threshold. It stopped being just something we do at Christmas and became who we are as a people. And that transformation from tradition to identity is what made the Christmas tree powerful enough to eventually conquer the world. But let me paint you a picture of what this actually looked like. It's December in, let's say, 1780. You're in a small town somewhere in the Upper Rhine region of Germany, Protestant territory. The air is sharp with cold, and snow crunches under your boots as you walk through the narrow streets. You pass house after house and through the windows, because people didn't have curtains the way we do now. You can see them. Christmas trees. Not in every home yet, but in enough that it's clearly the thing to do if you're respectable, if you're keeping up with tradition, if you want your children to have a proper Christmas. And these trees? They're beautiful. Modest by our standards, maybe. A lot of them are just large branches rather than full trees. But they're decorated with such care. Apples, always apples, red and shiny, tied with ribbon, gilded nuts that catch the candlelight, cookies cut into stars and angels and hearts, some plain, some decorated with coloured sugar. Paper roses, painstakingly crafted and painted by mothers and daughters, strings of dried berries, and if the family has money, real money, maybe a few glass ornaments, blown and painted by craftsmen, precious and fragile. The trees aren't lit constantly. Candles are too expensive for that. But on Christmas Eve? Oh, on Christmas Eve the candles are lit. The whole family gathers, and in that moment, with the smell of pine and wax and cookies in the air, with the light flickering across faces young and old, that's when Christmas feels real. This is what Christmas tree culture looked like when it reached maturity in Germany. And here's what's crucial to understand. It wasn't uniform. It wasn't standardized. It was beautifully, chaotically regional. See, Germany in the 1700s wasn't Germany as we know it today. It wasn't a unified nation. It was a patchwork. Hundreds of small kingdoms, principalities, free cities, ecclesiastical states, all nominally part of something called the Holy Roman Empire, but really operating independently. And the Christmas tree thrived in that fragmentation. In the Upper Rhine region, places like Baden, Württemberg, the Palatinate, the Christmas tree was everywhere by the mid-1700s. Protestant families considered it essential. You couldn't have a proper Christmas without one. Town councils would set up public Christmas trees in market squares. Guilds would compete to have the most impressive trees at their meetings, but travel just a little bit south into Catholic Bavaria, nothing. Or travel northwest into the Lower Rhine region. Also, nothing. Catholics in these areas viewed the Christmas tree with suspicion, as a Protestant custom, something not quite proper, maybe even a little heretical. There's a wonderful historical irony here. The Christmas tree, which started as a pagan tradition, got rebranded as Christian, then got adopted primarily by Protestants, which made Catholics suspicious of it again. The same tree kept changing meaning depending on who was claiming it. But in Protestant northern Germany, particularly in urban areas, the Christmas tree became a symbol of something beyond religion. It became a symbol of Gemütlichkeit. Okay, pause. I need to explain this word because it's so important and so untranslatable. Gemütlichkeit is a German concept that roughly means cozy warmth, comfortable togetherness, the feeling of being at home, relaxed, surrounded by people you love, with good food and good drink and no hurry to be anywhere else. It's that feeling when you're sitting by a fireplace with a cup of something warm and snow is falling outside and you're reading a good book or talking with friends and everything just feels right, peaceful, content, safe. The Christmas tree became the ultimate symbol of Gemütlichkeit. It represented the German ideal of home and family. It was the centerpiece around which that perfect domestic scene could unfold, and Germans started exporting this idea, not the tree itself yet, but the concept, in their art and literature. German writers in the late 1700s and early 1800s penned these beautiful, almost sentimental descriptions of Christmas Eve gatherings, always featuring the tree as the glowing heart of the home. These stories spread. People in other countries read them and thought, that sounds nice. That sounds like how Christmas should feel. But again, actually having a Christmas tree, that was still mostly a German thing. Let me give you some specific dates to show how this evolved. In 1747, the Moravian German community in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, German immigrants, remember, set up what might be the first community Christmas tree in America. But it wasn't a full tree. It was a wooden pyramid structure decorated with evergreen branches and candles. Very traditional, very German, very weird to the English-speaking Americans around them. The Americans, especially in New England, wanted nothing to do with it. The Puritans who had settled there generations earlier had banned Christmas entirely. They considered it a Catholic and pagan corruption. In Massachusetts, celebrating Christmas had been literally illegal, punishable by fine, from 1659 until 1681. Even in the 1840s, most Americans found Christmas trees strange at best, offensive at worst. So the Christmas tree remained confined to German immigrant communities, a taste of home in a new land, but not spreading beyond those communities. Back in Germany, though, the tradition was evolving, becoming more elaborate, more artful. By the early 1800s, German craftsmen were creating specialized Christmas ornaments. Glassblowers in Thuringia, a region that would later become famous for Christmas ornaments, started making delicate glass balls and figurines specifically for Christmas trees. These weren't mass-produced yet. Each one was handmade, often custom-ordered by wealthy families. Can you imagine being a glassblower in 1820, taking your craft, something you'd normally use for practical things like bottles and windows, and turning it into art? Creating these fragile, beautiful objects whose only purpose was to make a tree magical for a few weeks each year. There's something profound about that, about dedicating skill and time to creating beauty that's temporary, that serves no practical purpose except to bring joy. And the trees themselves were getting bigger. In rural areas, families still used branches or small trees. But in cities, in the homes of the growing middle class and the aristocracy, Christmas trees were becoming statements. A wealthy merchant might have a tree that reached from floor to ceiling, decorated not just with homemade ornaments but with expensive glass balls, with real candles in elegant holders, with gilded nuts and marzipan fruits. The tree became a way of displaying both your piety and your prosperity, and here's where it gets interesting. The German military got involved. During the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, yes, we're jumping ahead a bit, but this is important, the German military made a decision. They would place Christmas trees in military barracks and field hospitals. Soldiers far from home, wounded men recovering from battle, would have a piece of home brought to them. Why did this matter? Because soldiers talk. Soldiers write letters. Soldiers from all over Germany, from regions that didn't have strong Christmas tree traditions, suddenly experienced them, and when they went home, they brought the tradition with them. The military inadvertently helped standardize and spread the Christmas tree across all of Germany. But even before that military spread, something else was happening. The Christmas tree was becoming tied to German national identity in a way that went beyond religion or region. Remember, Germany was still fragmented in the early 1800s. There was no unified German nation, but there was a growing sense of German culture, a shared language, shared literature, shared traditions that bound these disparate states together, and the Christmas tree became a symbol of that shared identity. It was something that said, this is what we Germans do. This is part of who we are. When Germans emigrated, and in the 1800s millions did, fleeing war and economic hardship, they brought Christmas trees with them. To America, to South America, to Russia, to wherever they settled. Not because they thought other people should adopt the tradition, but because they couldn't imagine Christmas without it. It was like bringing seeds from your homeland and planting them in foreign soil, hoping they'd grow. Most of the time, the locals looked at these German immigrants and their decorated trees and thought, that's weird, and moved on. But sometimes, someone would pause, would look a little longer, would see not just a tree with ornaments, but what the tree represented. Family, warmth, light in darkness, all those things we keep coming back to, and they'd think, maybe we should try that. There's a beautiful moment in history, 1840 in London, that almost changed everything. Queen Charlotte, the German-born wife of King George III, set up a Christmas tree at Windsor Castle for a children's party. Notice that date. 1840. This is before the famous Victoria and Albert moment everyone knows about. Charlotte did it first, but it didn't catch on. Why? Because Charlotte, for all her royal status, wasn't particularly popular. She was seen as foreign, too German, and by association, her Christmas tree was foreign too. The tradition stayed confined to the royal family and a few German immigrant families in England. It didn't spread. The timing wasn't right. The messenger wasn't right. The tree needed someone with more influence, more popularity, more star power. But that moment in 1840 proved something important. The Christmas tree was ready to break out. It was mature enough, beautiful enough, meaningful enough to appeal beyond German culture. It just needed the right catalyst, and that catalyst was coming. But before we get to that revolutionary moment, I want you to appreciate something about German Christmas tree culture in its full expression. By the mid-1800s, Germans had developed elaborate rituals around the tree. The tree was decorated in secret. Parents would close the doors to the main room and spend hours arranging everything just so. Children weren't allowed to see until Christmas Eve. Then, on Christmas Eve, the doors would open. Often there would be a bell rung. and the children would enter to see the tree for the first time, lit with candles glowing in the darkness, with presents arranged beneath it. Can you imagine that moment? If you're a child who's been waiting all day, all week, building anticipation, and then you see that, that's not just a tree. That's magic made real. Germans had also developed specific music for this moment. O Tannenbaum, O Christmas Tree, became the unofficial anthem, and the lyrics are telling. It's not a song about the tree, it's a song to the tree, thanking it for its greenness, its constancy, its ability to bring joy. O Tannenbaum, wie treu sind deine Blätter. O Christmas tree, how faithful are your leaves. The tree isn't just decoration, it's a companion, a friend, a living thing that participates in the celebration. This emotional relationship with the Christmas tree, this sense that it's not just an object but almost a family member, that's deeply German. And it's part of what made the tradition so powerful, because when Germans eventually introduced the Christmas tree to other cultures, they weren't just sharing a decoration technique, they were sharing an emotional experience, a way of feeling Christmas. And that's what would eventually win people over. Not the tree itself, but the feeling it created. But to spread that feeling, to make the Christmas tree into a global phenomenon, would require something unprecedented. It would require mass media before mass media really existed. It would require a single image, carefully crafted, that could reach millions of people simultaneously and make them all want the same thing. It would require an engraving in a newspaper, a royal couple, and the most successful piece of Christmas marketing in human history. That image was about to be created, and when it was, everything would change. Sometimes history pivots on the smallest things. A photograph, a speech, a single image published in a newspaper. December 1848. The Illustrated London News, one of the most widely circulated publications in the English-speaking world, publishes an engraving. Just a simple sketch, really. A family scene. Nothing that seems revolutionary at first glance. But that image would do what centuries of German tradition, religious rebranding and cultural evolution couldn't do. It would make the Christmas tree fashionable, desirable, something that respectable people everywhere suddenly needed to have. And the secret wasn't the tree itself, it was who was standing next to it. Let me set the stage properly, because context is everything here. Queen Victoria ascended to the British throne in 1837 at just 18 years old. She inherited a monarchy that was, let's say, struggling with its image. Her predecessor William IV was tolerable but uninspiring. Before him, her uncle George IV had been a disaster, a glutton, a spendthrift, widely mocked and disliked. The British royal family needed rehabilitation, badly, and Victoria, young, earnest, determined to do things right, became exactly what the monarchy needed. She wasn't perfect, but she projected something the previous kings hadn't: respectability, family values, moral seriousness. Then, in 1840, she married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Yes, German, very German. And Albert brought with him not just political alliances and a handsome face, but German customs, German sensibilities, German Christmas traditions, including, of course, Christmas trees. Now here's what's important to understand. Victoria and Albert didn't invent the royal Christmas tree. Remember Queen Charlotte? She'd been doing Christmas trees at Windsor since the 1790s. The royal family had been quietly enjoying this German tradition for decades. But Victoria and Albert did something different. They made it public. They made it visible. because Victoria understood something that modern influencers would recognise immediately. Image is everything, and the royal family's image needed to shift from distant, formal, almost otherworldly, to relatable, domestic, family-focused. The Christmas tree became part of that strategy. Starting in 1841, Victoria and Albert made their Christmas celebrations a family affair. They'd gather their children, and they had 9 eventually, around a decorated tree at Windsor Castle. They'd exchange simple handmade gifts. They'd sing carols. They'd emphasize togetherness, warmth, love. This wasn't the aristocratic Christmas of previous generations. Lavish balls, endless courses of exotic foods, entertainment by professional performers. This was cozy, intimate, middle class in spirit, even if it happened in a palace. And Albert was the driving force behind much of it. He genuinely loved Christmas. He'd grown up in Coburg, in the heart of German Christmas tree country, and those childhood memories meant everything to him. There's a letter Albert wrote in 1847, 1 year before our famous engraving, where he gets almost poetic about Christmas trees. He writes about how seeing his children's delight at the tree brings back his own childhood, the joy he and his brother Ernest felt. He calls it an echo across time. That's not political calculation, that's genuine emotion. Albert really believed in this tradition. He really wanted to share it. But genuine emotion alone doesn't change culture. For that, you need media. Enter the Illustrated London News. In December 1848, the newspaper decided to document the royal Christmas. An artist was sent to Windsor Castle to observe and sketch the royal family's celebration. And what he captured was perfection. The engraving shows Queen Victoria and Prince Albert standing on either side of a Christmas tree. The tree is magnificent, about 6 feet tall, placed on a table so it's at eye level, decorated with candles, ornaments, and what look like small gifts hanging from the branches. Their children surround the tree, faces turned upward in wonder. At the base of the tree and on the table around it are presents, toys, dolls, books. But here's the genius of the image. It's not formal. It's not stiff. Victoria isn't wearing her crown. She's dressed like a wealthy but normal woman. Albert looks like a father, not a prince consort. The children look like children, excited, curious, fully absorbed in the moment. This was revolutionary, because royal portraiture up until this point had always emphasized distance, grandeur, power. Kings and queens were depicted as almost divine figures, separate from common humanity. But this said, look, the royal family does Christmas just like you might. They have a tree, they give gifts, they gather together, they're a family. And the British public ate it up. The image appeared in the Illustrated London News on December 23, 1848. By Christmas Eve, everyone in London was talking about it. By New Year's, copies had spread across Britain, and people started asking, where can I get a tree like that? Within a year, Christmas trees went from that weird German thing to what fashionable people do. Shops started selling small evergreens. Street vendors appeared, offering trees fresh from the countryside. Ornament makers started producing decorations for the new market. The Christmas tree became, essentially, trending, viral, in a pre-digital age. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The image jumped the Atlantic. 2 years later, in 1850, an American magazine called Godey's Lady's Book, the most influential women's magazine in the United States, published the same engraving. But with a twist. The editors did something cheeky. They edited the image. They removed Victoria's tiara and Albert's military medals and moustache. They made the royal couple look American. more relatable to their American audience who, remember, had fought a war to get away from British royalty. The caption didn't even mention that these were the British monarchs. It just presented this as an ideal family Christmas scene. And American women, Godey's had 150,000 subscribers by 1860, and each copy was shared among multiple readers, looked at this image and thought, that's how Christmas should look. The woman behind Godey's Lady's Book, by the way, was Sarah Josepha Hale, and she was, in her own right, one of the most influential women in American history. She's the one who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. She's also the one who successfully campaigned to make Thanksgiving a national holiday. And now, somewhat inadvertently, she was introducing the Christmas tree to mainstream America. By the 1860s, Christmas trees were appearing in middle-class American homes up and down the East Coast. By the 1870s, they were common. By the 1880s, they were expected, all because of one image, one carefully constructed, perfectly timed, brilliantly distributed image. But let me take you back to that moment in 1848, to what made it work so perfectly. Victoria was, at that point, the most famous woman in the world. Britain was the world's superpower. The British Empire covered a quarter of the globe. What happened in the British royal court mattered everywhere. And Victoria wasn't just famous, she was beloved. She represented a new kind of monarchy, moral, domestic, middle class in values, even if aristocratic in status. When Victoria endorsed something, whether intentionally or not, millions of people paid attention. It's not so different from modern celebrity culture, is it? When a major influencer or celebrity adopts a trend, suddenly everyone wants it. The mechanisms might be different, Instagram instead of newspapers, but the psychology is the same. We look to people we admire and think, if I do what they do, maybe I'll capture a bit of what they have. Maybe I'll feel how they seem to feel. Victoria and Albert's Christmas tree promise something irresistible. A perfect family Christmas. Warm, joyful, filled with love and wonder. And unlike most things associated with royalty, the palaces, the jewels, the servants, a Christmas tree was actually achievable for regular people. You couldn't live in Windsor Castle, but you could put up a tree in your parlour. That accessibility was crucial. The Christmas tree democratised royal lifestyle in a way nothing else could. And Albert, I think, understood this instinctively. In his vision of Christmas, wealth wasn't the point. The tree wasn't about showing off expensive ornaments, though the royal tree certainly had those. It was about creating a space where a family could gather, where children could experience wonder, where everyone could feel connected to something larger than themselves. There's a wonderful detail about Albert's approach to Christmas gifts. He insisted that gifts should be thoughtful, personal, often handmade. He'd spend months preparing presents for Victoria and their children, little drawings, poems, carefully selected books. Nothing extravagant, just meaningful. That ethos transferred to how people adopted the Christmas tree tradition. Yes, you could buy expensive glass ornaments if you could afford them, but you could also string popcorn and cranberries. You could bake cookies to hang on the branches. You could create paper decorations with your children. The Christmas tree became a canvas for whatever you could offer, whether that was wealth or just love and creativity. Now, I need to address something, because there's a critique of this whole story that's worth considering. Was this cultural appropriation? The British royal family taking a German tradition, popularising it, and essentially claiming it as their own? In a sense, yes, but it's also more complicated than that. Albert never pretended the Christmas tree was British. He openly called it a German custom, something from his homeland. He was sharing, not stealing. And Germans, for their part, were mostly proud that their tradition was spreading. They saw it as validation, proof that their culture had something beautiful to offer the world. But there's also no denying that once Britain adopted the Christmas tree, it became the British Christmas tradition in many people's minds. The German origins got fuzzy, forgotten even. That's the price of successful cultural transmission, I suppose. The thing you share becomes everyone's. It stops belonging to any one group. Is that good or bad? I honestly don't know. Both, maybe. But here's what I find beautiful about this moment in 1848. It proves that sometimes cultural barriers can be crossed through simple, genuine sharing. Albert loved Christmas trees. He wanted his children to experience what he'd experienced. Victoria supported him. They did it visibly, and millions of people saw something in that tradition that spoke to them too. No one forced anyone to adopt Christmas trees. People chose them because the trees offered something they wanted: beauty, tradition, a focal point for family celebration. Within 20 years of that 1848 engraving, the Christmas tree was no longer German or British. It was becoming universal. German immigrants had brought it to America, Brazil, Australia. British colonists were introducing it in India, Africa, Canada. The image of Victoria and Albert's tree had been reprinted in newspapers and magazines worldwide. By the end of the 19th century, the Christmas tree was on its way to becoming what it is today, one of the most recognizable symbols on Earth. But that universalization would bring new challenges, because once something becomes commercial, once it becomes an industry rather than just a tradition, it changes, sometimes in beautiful ways, sometimes in troubling ways. And the Christmas tree was about to become very, very commercial. The late 1800s would see the birth of the Christmas tree industry: tree farms, commercial ornament production, artificial trees. The tree would shift from something you went into the forest to cut yourself, to something you bought from a vendor, to something that appeared in every department store and public square. That commercialization would make Christmas trees accessible to everyone, but it would also raise questions that we're still wrestling with today. What happens when a sacred tradition becomes a consumer product? When the evergreen that once represented life and hope becomes just another thing to buy and sell? When the tree that families once decorated with handmade ornaments becomes a frame for mass-produced plastic? These questions matter, because they're about more than just Christmas trees. They're about how we relate to tradition itself in a modern commercial world. And those questions are where we're headed next. Beauty has always come with risk, and few things in history illustrate this quite like the Victorian Christmas tree, a masterpiece of light and wonder that had a nasty habit of burning houses down. Let me tell you about Christmas in the 1880s, because it was simultaneously magical and terrifying. Imagine you're a middle-class family in New York or London or Berlin. You've just brought your Christmas tree inside, a beautiful 6-foot fir, fresh and fragrant. You spend hours decorating it with your children. Glass ornaments catch the light. Tinsel shimmers. Paper angels hang from the branches. And then comes the moment everyone's been waiting for: lighting the candles. You have maybe 40, 50 candles attached to the branches with small metal clips or melted wax. Your hands shake slightly as you light them, one by one, moving carefully around the tree. The children watch, holding their breath. And then, it's done. The tree is illuminated. The room glows. The candles flicker and dance, making the ornaments sparkle like stars. It's absolutely breathtaking. For about 30 minutes, that's all you get. 30 minutes, maybe 45 if you're lucky and careful. Because after that, the branches start getting too hot. The needles, dried out from being indoors, become combustible. The candles burn down to dangerous levels, and everyone in the room knows, everyone, that at any moment one small mistake could turn this beautiful centerpiece into an inferno. So you keep buckets of water nearby, buckets of sand. You watch constantly. You never ever leave the room. And after your precious half hour of glowing beauty, you extinguish every single candle, carefully, one by one. And you do this knowing that some families just like yours, won't be so lucky this year. The Victorian era was obsessed with Christmas trees, and Victorian newspapers were full of stories about Christmas tree fires. Houses burned down, children burned, people died. In 1867, a fire at a Christmas celebration in a church in Chicago killed several people. The candles on the tree had ignited the decorations, and the fire spread so quickly that people couldn't escape. It made national news, but it didn't stop people from using candles. Because what else were you going to do? Not light the tree? That defeated the whole purpose. The candles were the thing. The light was what made it magical. Without the candles, you just had a tree with stuff hanging from it. But the danger was real and constant. Insurance companies in the 1880s and 1890s started refusing to pay out for fires caused by Christmas tree candles. They literally put it in their policies. If your Christmas tree causes a fire, you're on your own. It was happening too often, costing them too much money. Think about that. Insurance companies, who make their living by accepting risk, decided Christmas trees were too risky. But people kept doing it anyway. Why? Because 30 minutes of that glowing beauty was worth the risk to them. Because Christmas without the lit tree felt incomplete. Because humans have always been willing to flirt with danger for the sake of wonder. And inventors noticed. In 1878, a German inventor named Friedrich Arts created a clip-on candle holder specifically designed for Christmas trees. Before this, people had been using whatever they could find: melted wax, pins, wire twisted around branches. Arts's invention was brilliant in its simplicity. A weighted clip that could firmly attach a candle to any branch, keeping it upright and relatively secure. It was a huge improvement. It made candles safer, more reliable. It meant you could have more candles on your tree without quite as much risk of them tipping over and igniting everything, and it made the fire problem worse. Because now that it was easier to put candles on trees, people put more candles on trees, bigger, more elaborate displays. The Victorian obsession with Christmas maximalism was in full swing. More decorations, more gifts, more candles, more everything. The trees were getting more dangerous even as the technology improved. People tried various solutions. Some wrapped their trees in fireproof cloth. Some soaked their trees in chemical solutions meant to prevent burning, which made the whole house smell toxic, but at least reduced the fire risk slightly. Some built elaborate fire curtains around their trees, but none of it solved the fundamental problem. Open flame plus dried evergreen equals potential disaster. The solution, when it finally came from an unexpected place. Not from the Christmas industry, not from safety advocates, but from the brand new electrical industry. And it started with one man's desire to impress his dinner guests. Edward H. Johnson was the vice president of the Edison Electric Light Company. He worked directly with Thomas Edison, helping to develop and market electric lighting. And in 1882, just 2 years after Edison patented the incandescent light bulb, Johnson had an idea. His home in New York City was in one of the first neighborhoods to be wired for electricity. It was cutting-edge technology, so new that most people had never seen electric light. It was expensive, unreliable, and viewed with suspicion by most Americans who'd been using gas lamps and candles their entire lives. Johnson wanted to show what electricity could do. He wanted to make it beautiful, not just functional. So that Christmas, he hand-wired 80 light bulbs, red, white, and blue, and wrapped them around his Christmas tree. Let me pause so you can appreciate what he did. He didn't buy these lights. You couldn't buy them. They didn't exist as a product yet. He made them. He took glass bulbs, wired them by hand, painted them, connected them to a power source, and carefully strung them on his tree. It took him weeks of work. Each bulb was fragile, expensive, and temperamental. The whole contraption could have short-circuited and started a fire even more dangerous than candles. But when he flipped the switch on Christmas Eve 1882, his tree lit up like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Not flickering candlelight, but steady, bright, colourful electric light. No smoke, no dripping wax, no fire risk, just light. Pure, constant, magical light. Johnson invited journalists to see it. Word spread. The local newspaper sent a reporter who wrote a breathless account describing the tree as standing near the ceiling, with lights that twinkle and flash in all colours of the rainbow. People came from across the city to see Johnson's electric Christmas tree. They stood outside his window, marvelling at this impossible thing, a Christmas tree that glowed without fire. But here's the catch. Almost nobody could replicate it. Electricity wasn't widely available. The cost was astronomical. Johnson's display probably cost the equivalent of several $1,000s in today's money. And the technical knowledge required to wire up your own electric Christmas tree lights, beyond what most people could manage. So for the next 40 years, Christmas tree candles remained the standard. Even as electric lights slowly became more common in homes, they remained too expensive and complex for Christmas tree use. It wasn't until the 1920s that electric Christmas lights became commercially available and affordable for middle-class families, and even then they came with their own dangers. Early electric Christmas lights were, let's say, not up to modern safety standards. The insulation on the wires was minimal. The bulbs got extremely hot, not as hot as candles, but hot enough to burn dried needles if they touched. And the wiring was often faulty, prone to short circuits and electrical fires. Plus, there was that wonderful feature where if one bulb burnt out, the entire string went dark. You'd have to test each bulb individually to find the broken one. It was infuriating. I'm sure many of you have experienced this with older light strings and can appreciate the Victorian-era frustration. But at least your house probably wasn't going to burn down. That was a significant improvement. General Electric started mass-producing Christmas lights in 1919. They developed a longer-lasting tungsten filament and created complete kits, bulbs, sockets, wiring, everything you needed. They marketed them heavily. Safe, beautiful, modern, no more dangerous candles. And slowly, very slowly, electric lights replaced candles on Christmas trees. By the 1930s, most urban American families with access to electricity were using electric lights. By the 1950s, candles on Christmas trees had become rare, something only the very traditional or very rural still did. The transformation was complete. The Christmas tree had been tamed, domesticated, made safe for continuous display instead of those precious 30-minute windows. But something was lost too, don't you think? I've seen antique photographs of Victorian Christmas trees lit with candles, and there's something about the light quality that electric bulbs, even today, can't quite capture. Candlelight is alive. It moves, breathes, casts dancing shadows. It's warm in a way that even the warmest LED can't match. Those Victorians risking their homes for 30 minutes of that living light, they knew something we've forgotten. They knew that beauty sometimes requires sacrifice, that the most meaningful experiences often come with risk. Now, I'm not suggesting we go back to candles on trees. The fire risk is real, and we have better options now. But I think there's value in remembering that the Christmas tree wasn't always safe and convenient. It used to demand something from you: attention, care, constant vigilance. You couldn't just plug it in and walk away. You had to be present. You had to watch. You had to experience it now in this moment, because this moment was all you had. There's something beautiful about that, even if it's impractical. The evolution of Christmas tree lighting tells us something about our broader relationship with tradition and technology. We take dangerous things and make them safe. We take difficult things and make them easy. We take rare, precious moments and make them constant, available. And in doing so, we gain so much: convenience, safety, accessibility. More people can participate, fewer people die. But we also lose something: the preciousness that comes from scarcity, the heightened awareness that comes from risk. The way gathering around a lit Christmas tree used to feel like a special event, not just Tuesday evening. I wonder what those Victorian families would think if they could see our modern Christmas trees, lit 24/7 from Thanksgiving to New Year's. Thousands of LED lights, programmable, color-changing, synchronized to music, completely safe, requiring zero attention. Would they be relieved? Probably. Those fire buckets and sand pails and constant anxiety must have been exhausting. But would they also be a little sad? Would they miss that moment of lighting the candles together, the collective holding of breath, the shared responsibility of watching the tree? I think they might. Because here's the thing about danger and beauty. They've always been intertwined. The rose has thorns. The ocean is beautiful and deadly. The fire that warms us can destroy us. The Christmas tree for centuries embodied that duality. It was gorgeous and hazardous. It brought families together and sometimes burned their houses down. It was worth the risk, but the risk was real. Now it's just safe. And that's good. That's progress. But I can't help wondering if we've lost some of the reverence in gaining all that safety. If the Christmas tree means less to us now that it demands less from us. Or maybe I'm being too nostalgic. Maybe the fact that Christmas trees are now safe and easy and accessible to everyone is exactly what makes them beautiful. Maybe democratizing the tradition matters more than preserving the danger. What do you think? If you could go back and experience one Victorian Christmas Eve, with the candles and the fire buckets and the constant awareness that this moment was fleeting and precious, would you want to? I think I would. Just once. Just to understand what we used to find so worth the risk. But I'd be glad to come back to my safe, boring, LED-lit tree afterward. Because as much as I romanticize the past, I'm also quite fond of my house not burning down. The story of Christmas tree lighting is the story of human progress in miniature. We identify a problem, we innovate, we make things better, safer, more accessible, and in the process we change what the tradition means. But the changes weren't over, because making the Christmas tree safe and electric was just the beginning. The next transformation would be even more dramatic. The shift from something sacred and rare to something commercial and mass-produced. From forest to farm, from personal ritual to purchased product. That transformation would raise new questions, create new industries, and fundamentally alter what the Christmas tree represents in our culture. And it starts with one man's very unpopular decision about conservation. Progress has a price, and sometimes that price is measured in forests. By the 1890s, the Christmas tree had achieved something remarkable. It had gone from regional German custom to international phenomenon in just 50 years. But success created a new problem, a problem nobody had anticipated when this whole thing started. America was running out of trees, not all trees, obviously, but the specific types of evergreens people wanted for Christmas, firs, spruces, pines with the right shape and size, were being cut down at an alarming rate, especially near cities where demand was highest. Farmers and entrepreneurs had figured out they could make good money by cutting evergreens from forests, hauling them to urban markets, and selling them on street corners. It was a seasonal business, but profitable. Every December, wagons and eventually trucks would arrive from the countryside loaded with trees, and city dwellers would flock to buy them. In 1900, an estimated 20 million Christmas trees were sold in the United States alone. 20 million trees, cut down, displayed for a few weeks, then discarded, every single year. Conservationists were horrified, and nobody was more horrified than President Theodore Roosevelt. Now, you have to understand, Teddy Roosevelt was the conservation president. He created the U.S. Forest Service. He established 150 national forests, 5 national parks, 18 national monuments. He protected 230 million acres of public land. The man loved nature with a passion that bordered on obsessive. And in 1901, his first Christmas as president, he looked at the American tradition of cutting down millions of trees every year for a few weeks of decoration and thought, this is madness. So he made a decision, a principled, environmentally conscious, politically disastrous decision. He refused to have a Christmas tree in the White House. No tree, not as a statement, not symbolically, just no tree. Christmas 1901, the White House celebrated without one, and Roosevelt made sure everyone knew why. It was wasteful. It was destructive. It encouraged a practice that was decimating America's forests. The public response was not what he hoped for. People were furious. How dare the president cancel Christmas? How dare he tell American families they shouldn't have trees? What kind of Scrooge had they elected? Newspapers mocked him. Editorial cartoons depicted him as a tree-hating Grinch. Even his own children were reportedly upset. They wanted a Christmas tree like everyone else had. And here's where the story gets delicious. His sons, Archie and Quentin, staged a rebellion. In December 1902, the boys, aged 8 and 5, snuck a small Christmas tree into the White House. They hid it in a closet in their room, decorated it themselves, and presented it to their father on Christmas morning as a fait accompli. What's Roosevelt going to do? Tell his young children to throw away their Christmas tree. On Christmas Day, he caved. The tree stayed. But Roosevelt, being Roosevelt, turned it into a teaching moment. He brought in Gifford Pinchot, the head of the U.S. Forest Service, to talk to his sons about forest management and conservation. And Pinchot told them something Roosevelt hadn't fully understood. Cutting trees for Christmas wasn't necessarily bad for forests. In fact, if done right, it could be good. Here's the thing. Most Christmas trees weren't being cut from old-growth forests. They were being cut from young forests, from areas where trees grew densely and competed with each other. Thinning those areas, removing some trees to give others room to grow, actually improved forest health. The problem wasn't Christmas trees per se. The problem was unsustainable harvesting, taking too many trees from the wrong places without any plan for regrowth. The solution? Christmas tree farms. Now, tree farming wasn't invented in response to Roosevelt's protest. It had actually started in the 1880s, small operations where farmers would plant evergreens specifically for Christmas harvest. But it was Roosevelt's concerns and the publicity around them that accelerated the industry's growth. The logic was simple. Instead of cutting wild trees, grow trees specifically for Christmas. Plant them densely, manage them carefully, harvest them sustainably. It's agriculture, not deforestation. By 1910, Christmas tree farming was a real industry. By 1920, most Christmas trees sold in American cities came from farms, not wild forests. By 1950, it was virtually all farm trees. Today, about 25 to 30 million real Christmas trees are sold in America every year, and roughly 95% of them come from farms. There are approximately 15,000 Christmas tree farms operating across the United States, covering about 350,000 acres. These aren't huge operations mostly. The average Christmas tree farm is a family business, passed down through generations. And here's the fascinating part. It takes 7 to 10 years to grow a Christmas tree to the standard 6 to 8 foot height most people want. Think about that. A farmer plants a seedling today, knowing they won't sell it until 2032 or later. That's commitment. That's long-term thinking. That's agriculture at its most patient. But this transformation, from wild trees to farmed trees, fundamentally changed what the Christmas tree was. A tree you or your father cut from the forest yourself was free. It was an adventure. It was personal. You chose this specific tree from this specific place on this specific day. There was a story attached to it. A tree you buy from a vendor on a street corner for $20? That's just a product, a commodity. One tree is basically like another. The story is gone, replaced by a transaction. This is what I mean when I say the Christmas tree became commercial. It wasn't just that people were buying and selling trees. Commerce had been part of it since the 1850s. It's that the tree became standardized, mass-produced, stripped of uniqueness. And it wasn't just the trees, the ornaments too. Remember those beautiful German glass ornaments we talked about? The ones craftsmen in Thuringia made by hand, each one unique? By the 1890s, those were being mass-produced. Factories in Germany were churning out thousands of glass balls, all identical, all exported worldwide, which meant more people could afford to decorate their trees beautifully. That's wonderful. Democratization of beauty. But it also meant the ornaments lost their specialness. Instead of treasured heirlooms, each with a story, they became replaceable. Breakable and replaceable. The same thing happened with artificial trees. Germans started making artificial Christmas trees in the 1880s using goose feathers dyed green and attached to wire branches. Why? Because even in Germany, where evergreen forests were abundant, people worried about deforestation, and goose feathers were a waste product from the food industry. They were using something that would otherwise be thrown away. These feather trees were actually beautiful in their own weird way. They looked nothing like real trees, but they had a delicate ethereal quality, and they were reusable. You could use the same tree for years, even decades. Some American stores started importing German feather trees in the 1890s, and they became fashionable among wealthy urbanites who wanted something exotic and conversation-worthy. But the real boom in artificial trees came later, with an innovation that's either hilarious or horrifying depending on your perspective. In the 1930s, an American company that manufactured toilet bowl brushes, yes, really, found themselves with excess brush bristles. And someone had the genius idea, what if we make Christmas trees out of these? So they did. They took the same bristles they used for toilet brushes, dyed them green, attached them to wooden or metal frames, and sold them as Christmas trees. And people bought them. Millions of them. I'm not making this up. The Addis Brush Company, one of America's largest artificial tree manufacturers for decades, literally used toilet brush technology to create Christmas trees. Does knowing this ruin artificial Christmas trees for you? Because I can't look at them the same way now. But here's the thing. These artificial trees served a real purpose. They were affordable. They were reusable. They didn't shed needles all over your carpet. And importantly, they didn't require cutting down real trees. By the 1950s and 60s, aluminum Christmas trees became fashionable, shiny, silver, space-age looking. They reflected the mid-century obsession with modernity and technology. Your grandmother's tree might have been natural and traditional, but your tree was aluminum and modern. That fad didn't last. Aluminum trees are kind of tacky in hindsight, but it shows how the Christmas tree had become a consumer product subject to fashion trends like clothing or furniture. And then came plastic. Oh, plastic. Modern artificial Christmas trees, the ones you can buy at any big box store, are made from PVC plastic. They're manufactured primarily in China, shipped worldwide, and they look pretty good now, actually. Modern artificial trees can be remarkably realistic. But here's the environmental calculus that gets interesting. Is an artificial tree better for the environment than a real tree? Your instinct might be, of course, you use it for years instead of cutting a new tree every year. But it's more complicated. Real Christmas trees are a renewable crop. They're grown specifically for harvest, on land that might otherwise not be forested at all. While they're growing, they absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. And after Christmas, they can be mulched or composted. They're biodegradable. Artificial trees are made from petroleum-based plastic. Manufacturing them creates significant carbon emissions. Shipping them from China to America or Europe adds more. And when you're done with them, they sit in landfills for centuries because plastic doesn't biodegrade. Studies suggest you need to use an artificial tree for at least 10 years, some say 20, before its environmental impact becomes equivalent to using real trees for the same period. How many people keep their artificial trees for 20 years? Some do, many don't. Fashion changes, the tree gets damaged, people want an upgrade, so the environmental benefit of artificial trees is questionable at best. But let me bring this back to what it means for the Christmas tree as a tradition. The tree started as something rare and precious, something you had to work for, going into the forest, choosing carefully, cutting it yourself, or something you made, crafting decorations by hand, gathering with family to hang each ornament. Now it's something you buy. You drive to a lot, pick a tree that looks okay, tie it to your car, bring it home, or you pull a box from your basement and the tree is already pre-lit, already shaped, already done. Is that bad? I don't think it's bad. It's easier, more convenient, accessible to more people. But something's been lost, hasn't it? The sense of occasion, the effort, the story. When my grandparents talk about Christmas trees from their childhood, walking through the woods with their father, the cold air, the excitement of finding the perfect tree, the work of dragging it home, there's a reverence in their voices, a sense that getting the tree was part of Christmas, not just preparation for Christmas. Do we have that anymore? Or is the tree just decor? Something we set up because that's what you're supposed to do? I think this is the real cost of commercialization. Not the money, though Christmas has become absurdly expensive, but the loss of meaning. When something becomes easy and commercial, it risks becoming empty. And yet, I also think there's something beautiful about the fact that Christmas trees are now accessible to everyone, that you don't need to own land or have access to forests, that a family in an apartment in New York City can have the same Christmas tree experience as a family with acres of woods. The democratization of tradition matters, Maybe it's worth the loss of mystique if it means more people get to participate. But we're still wrestling with these questions, still trying to figure out the right balance between tradition and convenience, between meaning and accessibility, between sacred and commercial, and the Christmas tree, because it's so visible and central to the holiday, becomes the site where we work out these tensions. There's one more chapter in this commercialization story, one more transformation that would take the Christmas tree from private homes to public spectacle, from family tradition to civic symbol, from something personal to something performative. That transformation begins with construction workers, a depression, and one spontaneous gesture of gratitude that would become the most famous Christmas tree in the world. Hope is a strange thing. It shows up in the most unexpected places at the most desperate times. Sometimes it looks like a 20-foot tree decorated with tin cans and cranberries, standing in the middle of a construction site. December 24th, 1931. Christmas Eve. Manhattan, New York. The Great Depression has been grinding away at America for 2 years now. Banks have failed. Businesses have closed. Unemployment is somewhere around 25%. 1 in 4 Americans can't find work. Bread lines stretch around city blocks. Families are being evicted from their homes. The soup kitchens can't keep up with demand. And in the middle of this economic catastrophe, one man, John D. Rockefeller Jr., has decided to undertake the largest private construction project in modern history. He's building Rockefeller Center, 14 buildings on 3 city blocks in the heart of Manhattan. It's either the boldest investment decision ever made or the most foolish. Probably both. By December 1931, the construction site is a massive hole in the ground surrounded by steel frameworks and wooden scaffolding. And working on this site are about 40,000 men, construction workers, many of them recent immigrants, all of them desperate for any job they can get. Because here's the thing, while most of New York is suffering, Rockefeller Center is hiring. The pay isn't great, but it's steady, it's work, and in 1931, work means everything. A newspaper report from that December noted that while more than 120 carloads of Christmas trees remain unsold across the city, people too poor to afford them, the men working at Rockefeller Center consider themselves fortunate. They have jobs, they'll receive paychecks, they can go home to their families with something. So on Christmas Eve, as the workday ends, these men make a decision. They pool their money together. Not much, none of them have much, but enough to buy one of those unsold trees from a vendor who's probably grateful for any sale at this point. They purchase a 20-foot balsam fir and drag it to the center of the construction site, and then they decorate it. There are no store-bought ornaments, no expensive glass balls. They use whatever they have. Strings of cranberries, traditional, and cranberries are cheap. Paper garlands that their families make at home, and tin cans. Yes, tin cans. They hang empty tin cans from the branches because that's what they have, and somehow it works. Somehow it's beautiful in its own humble way. The tree isn't lit. They don't have candles or electric lights to spare, but they put it up anyway, right there in the dirt and mud of the construction site. And then the foreman sets up a small wooden table at the base of the tree, and one by one, the workers line up to receive their paychecks for the week before going home to their families for Christmas. There's a photograph of this moment. Black and white, grainy, but you can see it clearly. Dozens of men in work clothes and caps standing in line waiting patiently. Behind them, the tree. Around them, the skeletal frames of the buildings that will eventually become Rockefeller Center. Above them, a dark sky, and on every face you can see, if you look closely, not just exhaustion, but something else. Relief, gratitude, maybe even hope, because they have work, They're receiving pay. Their families will eat. And they have a Christmas tree, however humble, to mark the occasion. That tree wasn't planned. It wasn't part of any corporate strategy. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was just human. A spontaneous gesture by working men who wanted to mark Christmas, to create a moment of beauty and normalcy in the middle of chaos. Nobody thought it would become a tradition. Nobody thought it would matter beyond that one evening. But 2 years later, in 1933, someone at Rockefeller Center had an idea. The main building, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, known as 30 Rock, originally the RCA building, had just opened in May. The complex needed publicity. It needed to become a destination, not just office space. It needed to capture the public imagination. So they decided to make the Christmas tree official, annual, a spectacle. In December 1933, Rockefeller Center held its first official Christmas tree lighting ceremony. The tree was bigger this time, 50 feet tall. It was decorated properly, 700 lights, professional ornaments, and it was lit publicly with fanfare. This wasn't a humble tree for workers anymore. This was a show, an event, a symbol, and people came, thousands of them. New Yorkers dealing with the ongoing depression, looking for anything to lift their spirits, gathered to watch the tree light up. It worked. The ceremony made news. Rockefeller Center started becoming famous not just as a business complex but as a Christmas destination. And just like that, a tradition was born. But here's where the story reveals something about America, about resilience, about how symbols evolve. In 1941, the United States entered World War II, and Rockefeller Center, like everything else, had to adapt. In 1942, instead of one large tree, they put up 3 smaller trees, and they decorated them in red, white, and blue. Patriotic colors supporting the war effort. But here's the catch. From 1942 to 1944, the trees weren't lit. Federal blackout regulations, designed to protect American cities from potential air raids, prohibited the kind of outdoor lighting displays that had made the Rockefeller tree famous. So for 3 years, the tree stood dark, present but unilluminated. A Christmas tree you could see, but that didn't glow. Think about the symbolism there. America at war. Hope present but dimmed. Tradition maintained but constrained by necessity. And then, in 1945, the war ended. And in December of that year, the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree lit up again for the first time in 3 years. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? After years of darkness, rationing, fear, loss, to see that tree blazing with light again. It wasn't just a Christmas tree. It was a declaration. We made it through. We survived. The darkness is over, and the light is back. From that point on, the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree became more than a New York tradition. It became an American symbol, a representation of hope, resilience, continuity. The tree got bigger. The decorations got more elaborate. The lighting ceremony became a bigger production each year. In 1949, they did something weird. They painted the tree silver, supposedly to make it look more wintry. It looked bizarre. They never did that again. In 1951, the tree lighting was televised for the first time. Suddenly, millions of Americans who would never visit New York could experience it. The tradition went national through television. By the 1960s and 70s, the Rockefeller Center tree lighting had become the Christmas event in America. Celebrities performed. Crowds swelled into the tens of thousands. The tree itself became a competition. Bigger, taller, more ornate than the year before. In 1999, they erected the tallest tree in Rockefeller Center history, a 100-foot Norway spruce from Killingworth, Connecticut. 100 feet. That's 10 stories tall. That's not a tree. That's a monument. The tree now comes with a star. Not just any star, but a Swarovski crystal star designed by famous architects. The first one, created in 2004, weighed 550 pounds and featured 25,000 crystals. The current one, designed by Daniel Libeskin in 2018, weighs 900 pounds and has 3 million crystals on 70 spikes. 900 pounds, sitting on top of a tree, requiring specialized engineering to keep it from crushing the branches below. The tree is wrapped in more than 50,000 LED lights. That's 5 miles of wire. The lights are energy efficient now, powered partially by solar panels since 2017, because even spectacle can be sustainable if you try. And the numbers of visitors, approximately 125 million people, view the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree each season. Some in person, many more through television, and now online. 125 million. That's more than a third of the entire US population. The tree has become, in a very real sense, America's Christmas tree. Not in any official capacity. There's a national Christmas tree in Washington, D.C., separate tradition, but in terms of cultural significance, the Rockefeller tree is the tree. But I want to take you back to something. Back to that first tree in 1931, 20 feet tall, decorated with tin cans and hope, put up by workers who had so little but gave what they could to mark something sacred. That tree cost maybe a few dollars. It had no engineering, no celebrity performances, no television cameras. Nobody famous touched it. And yet, wasn't it more meaningful than what we have now? I don't mean to diminish the modern tree. The Rockefeller Center tree is genuinely spectacular. It brings joy to millions. It's a technical marvel and a work of art. But that first tree was necessary. It was needed in a way the current tree isn't. It represented something urgent, the human need to create beauty and meaning even, especially in the darkest times. The modern tree is a celebration. The 1931 tree was a prayer. There's a profound difference. And I think this transformation, from workers' tree to corporate spectacle, mirrors the larger transformation of Christmas itself in America. We've made it bigger, more impressive, more expensive, more everything. But have we made it more meaningful? I'm not sure we have. Don't get me wrong, I love the Rockefeller Center tree. I've seen it in person, and it's breathtaking. The engineering alone is remarkable. The fact that they transport these enormous trees from wherever they find them, sometimes hundreds of miles away, lower them into place with cranes, and transform them into these glowing monuments. It's incredible. But sometimes I wonder what those workers from 1931 would think if they could see what their simple gesture became. Would they be proud, awed, or would they feel that something essential got lost in the translation from humble to spectacular? After September 11th, 2001, the Rockefeller Center tree took on new meaning again. That year it was decorated in red, white and blue once more, echoing those World War II trees, and it represented again resilience, recovery, the refusal to let darkness win. People came to see it not just as a Christmas tradition, but as a statement. New York survives, America survives, light persists, and in that moment the tree reclaimed some of its original meaning. It wasn't just spectacle, it was necessary again. It was a prayer again. Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe traditions need to be tested, need to be challenged, need to matter urgently sometimes so they don't become empty ritual. The Rockefeller Center tree matters most when it's more than entertainment, when it's a symbol of something deeper than commerce or tourism. And yet, for all my philosophical musing, I can't deny the simple fact. Millions of people smile when they see that tree. Children press their faces against car windows to glimpse it. Proposals happen under it. Families save for years to visit New York specifically to see it. So maybe the meaning hasn't been lost. Maybe it's just been shared, democratized, spread out among millions of people instead of concentrated among a few dozen workers. Maybe that's worth the loss of intimacy. Or maybe, and this is what I really think, we need both. We need the grand public trees that unite communities and create shared experiences, and we need the humble private trees that connect us to the people we love most. The Rockefeller tree can't replace your family's tree, but it can enhance it. It can remind you that you're part of something larger, that across the city, across the country, across the world, millions of other people are also gathered around trees, also celebrating light in darkness, also hoping for something better. That's powerful. That matters. But the story of the Christmas tree isn't complete yet, because what happened with Rockefeller Center, the transformation of a private tradition into public spectacle, that wasn't unique to New York. All over the world, cities and communities started putting up their own public Christmas trees, each with their own story, their own meaning, their own way of adapting an ancient tradition to modern needs. And those adaptations would carry the Christmas tree to places its pagan origins never imagined, to countries that had never seen winter, to cultures with no Christian tradition, to contexts so far removed from Germanic forests and Victorian parlours that the tree would have to mean something completely new. That global journey is where we're headed next. Cultural conquest doesn't always happen through force. Sometimes it happens through beauty, through the simple, irresistible appeal of something that makes people feel good. The Christmas tree conquered the world not because anyone insisted on it, but because people everywhere, from every culture and religion, looked at it and thought, I want that in my home. By the early 20th century, the Christmas tree had become standard across Europe and North America, but its journey was just beginning. Because in the decades following World War II, as global communication accelerated and Western culture spread through media and commerce, the Christmas tree travelled to places its Germanic originators never could have imagined, to places where it never snows, to countries where Christianity is a minority religion or doesn't exist at all, to cultures with completely different winter traditions or no winter at all. And in each place the Christmas tree had to be translated, adapted, made to fit contexts wildly different from a German living room or Victorian parlour. Let me give you some examples because this is where it gets really interesting. Japan, a country where Christians make up less than 2% of the population, where the dominant religions are Shinto and Buddhism, neither of which have any connection to Christmas or Christ. And yet, walk through Tokyo in December and you'll see Christmas trees everywhere, in shopping malls, in train stations, in restaurants and office buildings. The famous Shibuya crossing, that intersection you've seen in every movie about Tokyo, has a massive illuminated Christmas tree every December. But here's the thing. In Japan, Christmas isn't a religious holiday. It's not about Jesus or Christian theology. It's about aesthetics, romance, consumerism, yes, but also something deeper. The appeal of creating a special, magical atmosphere during the darkest time of year. Young Japanese couples celebrate Christmas Eve like Valentine's Day. It's one of the most popular nights for dates and marriage proposals. Families have Christmas dinner, but it's usually Kentucky Fried Chicken. Yes, KFC. That's a whole other story involving brilliant marketing in the 1970s, and Christmas trees, they're part of the aesthetic, part of creating that special feeling. They're beautiful, sparkly, festive. They don't need to mean anything Christian to be valuable. The tree has been completely secularized, stripped of its religious meaning and valued purely for its visual and emotional impact. Is that wrong? Is that disrespectful to the tradition? Or is it just proof of how powerful the Christmas tree is as a symbol? That even without any of its original meaning, even without Christianity or winter or any of the cultural context, it still works. It still makes people happy. I think that's remarkable. China has an even more interesting relationship with the Christmas tree. China is officially atheist. The communist government doesn't promote any religion, and yet China is now the world's largest manufacturer of artificial Christmas trees and Christmas decorations. Think about that. The country producing most of the world's Christmas trees is a country where Christmas isn't celebrated as a holiday by most people. Chinese factories make approximately 85% of the world's artificial Christmas trees. They're shipped to America, Europe, Australia, everywhere. The global Christmas tree industry quite literally runs through China. And in major Chinese cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, you'll see Christmas trees in commercial districts. Not in homes, usually. Not as a family tradition, but as commercial displays, as decoration for shopping seasons. The Christmas tree has become completely divorced from Christmas itself and turned into a symbol of winter commerce, international sophistication, Western modernity. It's fascinating and a little unsettling how malleable meaning can be. Let's talk numbers, because the scale of the modern Christmas tree industry is staggering. Globally, approximately 300 million Christmas trees are grown on farms right now. Not 300 million sold, 300 million currently growing, in various stages of development, waiting to be harvested. The Christmas tree industry is worth about $2 billion annually worldwide. That's just the trees themselves, not counting ornaments, stands, lights, and all the other associated products. In the United States alone, 25 to 30 million real Christmas trees are sold every year. Add another 10 to 12 million artificial trees purchased annually, and that's just America. Add Europe, Australia, parts of Asia, South America, the numbers become almost incomprehensible. We're talking about an industry that touches billions of dollars and hundreds of millions of people every single year, all centered around this tradition that started with pagans trying to survive winter darkness. But here's where we need to have an uncomfortable conversation. What is the environmental impact of all this? Real Christmas trees require land. About 350,000 acres in the US alone are dedicated to Christmas tree farming. That's land that could be used for food production or could be wild habitat. On the other hand, those Christmas tree farms are forests technically. While the trees are growing, and remember it takes 7 to 10 years, they're absorbing carbon dioxide and producing oxygen. They're providing habitat for some species. They're preventing soil erosion. And after Christmas, real trees can be mulched, composted, or turned into lumber for habitat for humanity, which is what happens to the Rockefeller Center tree now. They're biodegradable. They return to the earth. But the process of growing them uses water, pesticides in many cases, fertilizers. Transporting them from farms to markets uses fuel. And not all trees are properly recycled. Many end up in landfills, where they don't biodegrade well because landfills don't have the right conditions for decomposition. Artificial trees have their own problems. They're made from PVC plastic derived from petroleum. Manufacturing them creates significant pollution. Most are made in China and shipped thousands of miles burning fossil fuels. And when you're done with an artificial tree, it goes to a landfill where it will sit for centuries. It cannot biodegrade. It cannot be recycled, at least not easily or economically. Studies suggest you need to use an artificial tree for at least 10 to 20 years for it to be environmentally equivalent to buying real trees over the same period. But trends and fashions change. Trees get damaged. People want upgrades. The average lifespan of an artificial tree in actual use is probably closer to 6 to 8 years. So environmentally it's a mess. Both options have problems. Neither is clearly better. And yet, we keep doing it. Why? Because the Christmas tree has transcended its origins. It's no longer about winter solstice or Christianity or German tradition or Victorian families. It's become a universal symbol of celebration, of joy, of light in darkness, concepts that resonate across all cultures. The tree speaks to something primal in humans, our need to mark important moments, to create beauty, to gather together around something central and meaningful. But there's a growing movement to reconsider this, to ask whether we need to rethink our relationship with Christmas trees entirely. Some people are opting out of traditional trees altogether. They're creating alternative trees from books stacked in pyramids, or from wooden ladders decorated with ornaments, or from lights arranged on walls in tree shapes. Others are choosing potted living trees that can be planted after Christmas. You keep the tree in a pot, decorate it, then plant it in your yard or donate it to a reforestation project. The tree lives on instead of being discarded. Some families are returning to the Victorian model, smaller trees, displayed for shorter periods, decorated with more homemade ornaments and fewer purchased ones. And some are going fully artificial but committing to keeping their trees for decades, treating them as heirlooms rather than disposable products. Each approach is trying to reconcile this tension. We love Christmas trees, but we're aware of the environmental cost. We want the tradition, but we're not sure we can justify the impact. This tension didn't exist for the ancient pagans who brought evergreen branches into their homes. Those branches were from their local forests, taken sustainably, returned to the earth naturally. It didn't exist for medieval Germans decorating paradise trees in their homes. They used local trees, homemade decorations, natural materials. It didn't even exist for Victorians, really. Yes, they cut down trees, but at a scale that forests could handle, and their decorations were simple. Paper, food, a few precious ornaments. The environmental crisis of Christmas trees is a modern problem, created by modern scale, by the fact that something that used to be rare and precious has become ubiquitous and disposable. And I think this is the real challenge we face with many traditions in the modern world. How do we maintain meaningful practices in a way that's sustainable at the scale of billions of people? Because the Christmas tree tradition is beautiful. It brings genuine joy to hundreds of millions of people. It creates memories, strengthens family bonds, marks the passage of time. But if it's destroying the environment in the process, if it's contributing to deforestation and pollution and climate change, can we justify it? Should we? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're real dilemmas that each of us has to grapple with individually and that we need to address collectively. Some countries are handling this more thoughtfully than others. In parts of Scandinavia, there's a strong tradition of renting Christmas trees. You get a potted living tree for the season, then return it to be replanted. The same tree can be rented out for years before it becomes too large. In Germany, where the tradition started, there's a growing movement towards sustainably sourced local trees, organic farming practices, and composting programs that ensure every tree is turned into mulch for gardens. In some Asian countries that have adopted Christmas trees despite no Christian tradition, there's less attachment to having a real tree. Artificial trees are fully acceptable, and people do tend to keep them for longer periods because they are not as steeped in the tradition of annual tree shopping. But in America and much of Europe, we're struggling. We're caught between nostalgia for how things have always been done and awareness that the old ways might not be sustainable anymore. What's the answer? I honestly don't know. I don't think there's one answer that works for everyone. But I do think we need to be intentional, conscious, aware of what we're doing and why. If you get a real tree, make sure it's sustainably sourced and properly recycled afterward. Support tree farms that use organic practices. Choose a local tree to reduce transportation impact. If you get an artificial tree, commit to keeping it for at least a decade. Treat it as an investment, not a disposable product. Maybe it becomes a family heirloom, passed down through generations. Imagine that. An artificial tree with history and meaning. Or find alternative ways to bring the symbolism of the tree into your celebration without the environmental cost. Create art installations, use plants you can keep year-round, build traditions that don't require cutting down or manufacturing trees. The point isn't that there's one right answer. The point is that we should be asking these questions, thinking about what our traditions cost and whether we're willing to pay that price. Because the Christmas tree has survived for thousands of years by adapting, from pagan to Christian, from German to global, from sacred to secular, from rare to ubiquitous. Maybe its next evolution is becoming sustainable, becoming conscious, becoming a tradition that doesn't just celebrate life symbolically through evergreen branches, but actually protects life through thoughtful choices. That would be a fitting development for a tradition that started with ancient peoples revering trees as symbols of survival and hope. But there's one more chapter to this story, one more layer of meaning we need to explore. Because beyond the history, beyond the commercialization, beyond the environmental concerns, there's something else the Christmas tree represents. Something deeper and more personal. Something about why this particular tradition has such power over us, why it touches something primal in the human heart. That's where we're going to finish this journey. There are moments in life when you see something ordinary and suddenly understand something profound. When the surface meaning falls away and you glimpse what's really happening beneath. I had one of those moments a few years ago standing in front of a Christmas tree. It wasn't a special tree, just a standard 7-footer in someone's living room, decorated normally, lights, ornaments, the usual. But I was there early in the morning before anyone else was awake, and the only light in the room came from the tree itself, and I just stood there, watching the lights, breathing in that sharp green scent of pine, feeling something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't nostalgia, though nostalgia was part of it. It wasn't religious feeling, though there was something spiritual about it. It was something deeper, something ancient. And I realized I was having the exact same experience that a Norse farmer had 2,000 years ago, bringing evergreen branches into his home to ward off darkness. The same experience a Victorian mother had, lighting candles on her tree while her children watched in wonder. The same experience those construction workers had in 1931, standing before their humble tree decorated with tin cans, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles and completely different contexts. We were all feeling the same thing: hope, wonder, the defiant belief that light persists even in the deepest darkness. That's the real story of the Christmas tree, not the history, though the history is fascinating. Not the commercialization, though that's important to understand. Not even the environmental impact, though we need to grapple with that. The real story is psychological, spiritual, universal. The Christmas tree speaks to something fundamental in the human condition, and I want to explore what that is. Let me introduce you to a perspective that changed how I think about Christmas trees entirely. The Anishinaabe people, indigenous peoples of North America, primarily around the Great Lakes region, have a name for the balsam fir tree. They call it Ingi Gido Ag. It means she stands at prayer for us. Not it, she. The tree is alive, conscious, spiritual, a being, not an object. And the tree's fragrance, that sharp, clean, unmistakable scent that fills your home when you bring a balsam fir inside, that's not just a pleasant smell. According to Anishinaabe tradition, that fragrance is the tree's prayer. The tree is praying on our behalf, standing in our homes, releasing her prayer into the air we breathe, blessing us with her presence. When I first learned this, it stopped me cold, because it reframes everything. We don't just bring a tree into our homes for decoration. We invite a spiritual being to join our family, a being that has stood in forests enduring storms and seasons, growing slowly and patiently, a being that now stands in our living room, offering prayers we didn't even know we needed. This isn't metaphor for the Anishinaabe. This is how they understand the world. Trees have agency. Trees have spiritual presence. Trees participate in the sacred order of things. And whether or not you believe in that worldview literally, there's something profound about treating the Christmas tree not as a product or decoration, but as a living being deserving of respect and gratitude. Mary Searsip Genius, an Anishinaabe ethnobotanist, wrote, "Plants have so much to give us. All we have to do is ask." And I think that's what the Christmas tree has been offering humanity for thousands of years. Not just visual beauty or nostalgic feelings, but something spiritual, something healing. When you walk into a room with a Christmas tree, even if you're not consciously thinking about it, even if you're distracted by shopping or stress or whatever, something in you settles, something breathes easier. Is that just the pleasant scent triggering happy memories? Maybe. Probably. But maybe it's also something deeper. Maybe it's the tree doing exactly what the Anishinaabe say, standing at prayer for us, offering something we desperately need but don't know how to ask for. Peace, presence, connection to something larger than ourselves. Think about what the evergreen represents across every culture that's adopted it. Persistence, life that refuses to die, growth that continues even when everything else seems dead. That's not just a nice metaphor. That's a truth we need to hear, especially in the darkest times of year, when everything feels dead, when the world is grey and cold, when the sun sets at 4:30 p.m. and rises at 8 a.m. when darkness dominates, the evergreen stands green, alive, defiant, and that defiance isn't aggressive or violent, it's gentle, patient. The tree doesn't fight winter, it endures winter, it remains itself through winter. There's wisdom in that, wisdom we need. Because life has winters, not just literal seasonal winters, but metaphorical ones. Times when everything feels dead or dying, when hope feels foolish, when darkness seems permanent. The Christmas tree, whether you interpret it through pagan, Christian, secular or indigenous frameworks, says the same thing. This darkness is temporary. Life persists. Light will return. Not because of anything you do, not because you earn it or deserve it, just because that's the nature of things. Winter always gives way to spring. Darkness always gives way to light. Death always gives way to new life. The tree is a promise, a visible, tangible promise that you can touch and smell and see. And humans need promises like that, especially now. I think that's why the Christmas tree has survived every cultural transformation it's gone through, why it works for pagans and Christians and secular people and cultures that have never experienced winter, why it resonates in shopping malls and churches and living rooms and public squares. Because beneath all the surface meanings, beneath the religious interpretations and the commercial exploitation and the nostalgic associations, there's this core truth that speaks to every human heart. You're not alone in the darkness. Life continues. Hope is reasonable. The tree standing in your home is proof. There's a beautiful essay by Damien Costello about Christmas trees where he describes a childhood memory, going with his family into the forest to cut their own tree. The cold air, the snow, the work of finding the right tree, cutting it down together, dragging it home through the woods under the stars. And he writes about how that tree, once decorated and placed in their home, created a presence. It wasn't just decoration, it was a member of the household. It changed the space. It made the home feel different, sacred even. Costello writes, "The tree brought us together in a new way, and then, maybe even more so when she was gone, leaving the same emptiness that my cousins left after a weekend visit. The tree was a she, a presence, someone who could be missed. This is what I'm talking about. This is the deeper meaning. The Christmas tree creates sacred space. It transforms ordinary rooms into places where families gather differently, where conversation happens differently, where children experience wonder and adults remember how to be present. You've felt this, haven't you? The way a room with a lit Christmas tree just feels different, even if you can't articulate why. That's not imagination. That's the tree doing its work, creating what the Germans call Gemütlichkeit, that cozy, warm, connected feeling, creating what the Anishinaabe call prayer, that sense of being held by something larger and kinder than ourselves. Now, I want to acknowledge something important. Not everyone has positive associations with Christmas trees. For some people, the holidays are painful, full of loss or loneliness, or difficult family dynamics or religious trauma. The Christmas tree might represent obligation rather than joy, performance rather than authenticity, consumption rather than meaning. And that's valid, that's real. But I think even in those painful contexts, the tree itself, the actual evergreen standing there, isn't the problem. The problem is everything we've loaded onto it, all the expectations and commercialism and family dysfunction. The tree is just a tree, green and alive and offering what it's always offered, a promise that life continues, that darkness is temporary, that growth persists. Maybe part of healing our relationship with Christmas trees is stripping away some of that baggage, getting back to something simpler. One person I know who struggles with Christmas has developed a practice. They get a small potted evergreen each year. They don't decorate it. They just keep it in their home, water it, care for it, and in the spring they plant it outside. No expectations, no performance, just welcoming a living being into their space for a season, caring for it, thanking it, releasing it. That's closer to what the ancient pagans did, I think. It's closer to the Anishinaabe understanding. It's treating the tree as sacred, not because of what it represents, but because it's alive. Because life itself is sacred, and there's something powerful about that simplicity. Because here's what I've come to believe. The Christmas tree works. It has endured. It has spread. It has meant something across thousands of years and hundreds of cultures because it taps into truths that transcend any single religion or tradition. Truths about light and darkness, about hope and endurance, about the cycles of nature and the resilience of life. Truths that ancient pagans knew, that medieval Christians knew, that indigenous peoples knew, that modern secular people know, even if they express it differently. The Christmas tree is a translator of sorts. It takes these deep, often inexpressible truths and makes them visible, tangible, present. You can't explain to a child the complex theology of incarnation, or the astronomical mechanics of the winter solstice, or the psychological benefits of ritual and symbol. But you can show them a tree, green in winter, lit with lights, standing in your home, and they understand immediately, intuitively. That's magic. Real magic. The kind that doesn't require special effects or supernatural intervention. The magic of meaning made manifest. So when you look at your Christmas tree this year, whether it's real or artificial, whether it's in your home or a public square, whether you celebrate Christmas religiously or secularly or not at all, I invite you to see it differently. Not as decoration, not as tradition, not as obligation or commerce, but as a living prayer, as a promise made visible, as a gentle, patient reminder that you are held by something larger than yourself, that darkness is temporary, that life persists. She stands at prayer for us. And maybe, just maybe, we can learn to stand at prayer with her, to offer our own gratitude, our own hope, our own defiant belief in light, because that's ultimately what the Christmas tree teaches us, not through doctrine or rules or commandments, but through simple presence. Be green when everything else is grey. Be alive when everything else seems dead. Stand firm in the darkness and trust that light will return. That's not just advice for winter, that's advice for living. And it comes from a tree, a simple, patient, evergreen tree that has been teaching this lesson for thousands of years to anyone willing to notice. So maybe the question isn't, where did the Christmas tree come from? We've answered that. It came from many places, many people, many centuries of evolution. The real question is, what does the Christmas tree offer us now? And the answer, I think, is the same thing it's always offered. The same thing those ancient pagans needed. The same thing Victorian families needed. The same thing Depression-era workers needed. Hope, light, the promise that life continues. She stands at prayer for us. All we have to do is receive the blessing. But there's one more question we need to ask. One final reflection that brings everything together. Because after all we've explored, the history, the commerce, the global spread, the spiritual meaning, we still need to answer, what does all this mean for us, personally right now? That's where we conclude. So here we are, at the end of a journey that's taken us across thousands of years and thousands of miles, from ancient forests to modern cities, from pagan rituals to Christian appropriation, to secular celebration to global phenomenon. And if you've stayed with me this whole time, and I'm grateful you have, you might be wondering, what does all this mean? What am I supposed to do with all this information? Because history is interesting, sure, but it only matters if it teaches us something, if it changes how we see the world, how we live. So let me offer you something personal, something I've learned from spending so much time thinking about Christmas trees and what they represent. The Christmas tree doesn't belong to anyone, not to the pagans who first revered evergreens, not to the Christians who claimed them, not to the Germans who formalized the tradition, not to the Victorians who popularized it, not to the corporations who commercialized it. The Christmas tree belongs to everyone and no one. It's ours collectively, shaped by every culture that's touched it, belonging fully to none. And that's actually beautiful, because it means you get to decide what it means for you. You don't have to celebrate it the way your parents did. You don't have to follow tradition blindly. You don't have to buy into the commercial madness or the environmental waste or the religious interpretations that don't resonate with you. You can take this ancient symbol and make it yours. Adapt it. Personalize it. Strip it down to its essence or build it up into something elaborate. Honor the history while creating your own meaning. That's what every generation has done. That's what every culture has done. The pagans took winter survival rituals and made them sacred. The Christians took pagan trees and made them theological. The Germans took banned traditions and made them domestic. The Victorians took humble customs and made them fashionable. The moderns took personal traditions and made them commercial. Each transformation added layers. Each generation contributed something. And now it's your turn. What will you make of the Christmas tree? Maybe for you, it's about family, about creating a ritual that brings your people together in ways that everyday life doesn't, about building memories that your children will carry forward, adapting them for their own children someday. There's something powerful in that continuity, in knowing that when you decorate a tree with your family, you're participating in something your great-great-grandparents might have done, that your descendants might do, that you're a link in a chain stretching backward and forward through time. Maybe for you, it's about beauty, about creating something lovely in a world that often feels harsh and ugly, about taking the time to craft something that serves no practical purpose except to make you and others feel good. In a culture obsessed with productivity and efficiency, there's rebellion in that. In spending hours decorating a tree that will only stand for a few weeks, in choosing beauty for beauty's sake. Maybe for you, it's about spirituality, about marking sacred time, about creating space in your home and your life for contemplation, gratitude, connection to something larger than yourself. Whether you interpret that through Christian theology, pagan nature worship, indigenous wisdom, or secular humanism, the tree can hold that meaning. It's big enough, old enough, deep enough to carry whatever spiritual significance you need it to carry. Maybe for you, it's about hope, about marking the darkest time of year, literal or metaphorical, with a symbol that promises light will return, that life persists, that you will make it through this winter. If you're going through something hard right now, and many of you are because life is hard, the Christmas tree offers a gentle reminder. You've survived every dark season before this one. You will survive this one too. Spring always comes. Always. Or maybe, honestly, the Christmas tree doesn't mean much to you at all. Maybe it's just a nice decoration, a pleasant tradition you participate in without deep investment, and that's okay too. Not everything has to be profound. Sometimes a tree is just a tree, and the simple pleasure of looking at something pretty and festive is enough. But I want to challenge you gently to think about one thing. Whatever the Christmas tree means to you or doesn't mean, you have a choice in how you engage with it. You can participate mindlessly, buy a tree because that's what you do, decorate it while half watching TV, let it stand in your living room as background scenery, take it down and move on, or you can participate mindfully, make it a ritual, an intention, a practice. What if, this year, you approached your Christmas tree differently? What if you actually thought about where it came from? If it's real, where was it grown? By whom? What did it take to get it to you? Can you feel gratitude for that journey? What if you decorated it slowly, deliberately? Put on music you love. Invite people you care about. Tell stories about the ornaments, where each one came from, what it represents. Create new ornaments together. What if you spent time with your tree? Not just passing by it on your way to somewhere else, but actually sitting with it, watching the lights, breathing in the scent, letting it do what the Anishinaabe say it does, stand at prayer for you. What if you said thank you to the tree itself, if that feels comfortable, or to whoever grew it, or made it, or gave it to you, or just to the universe for the existence of evergreen trees and the human creativity that turned them into this tradition? What if you used your tree as a reminder? Every time you see it, pause for just a moment. Take one deep breath. Remember that you're alive, that despite everything, Despite all the darkness and difficulty and uncertainty, life persists. Light returns. You're still here. These are small practices, simple things. They cost nothing. They require no religious belief or cultural background. But they transform the Christmas tree from object to experience, from tradition to practice, from meaningless routine to meaningful ritual. And I think that's what we need more of in modern life. Not more stuff, not bigger displays, not more expensive ornaments or taller trees or brighter lights. We need more meaning, more intention, more presence. The Christmas tree can offer that, if we let it. Now I know some of you are thinking, but what about the environmental impact? Didn't we just talk about how problematic this whole industry is? Yes, we did, and that matters. But here's the thing, you can hold two truths at once. You can love the tradition while acknowledging its problems. You can participate mindfully while working toward better solutions. Get a sustainable tree if you can. Support local growers using organic practices. Ensure your tree is properly recycled or composted. Or get a potted tree you can plant. Or use an artificial tree for 20 years. Or create alternative traditions that honor the symbolism without the environmental cost. The point isn't perfection. The point is consciousness, trying, caring. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us approach the Christmas tree tradition with more awareness and intention, the industry will shift. Farms will become more sustainable. Artificial trees will be made from better materials. New traditions will emerge that honor the past while protecting the future. Change happens slowly, but it starts with individuals making different choices. You have more power than you think. Let me tell you about a tradition I started a few years ago. It's small, maybe silly, but it means something to me. Every year before I put up my Christmas tree, I take a moment. I hold my hands on the tree, whether it's real or artificial doesn't matter, and I speak to it, out loud. I say, "Thank you for being here. Thank you for whatever you endured to get here." Whether that's growing in a field for 7 years, or being manufactured in a factory halfway around the world, or being stored in my basement for another year. Thank you for the beauty you bring, for the memories you help create, for the hope you represent. And then I say, I promise to honor you, to see you, to not take you for granted. Is this weird? Maybe. Probably. But it changes how I feel about my tree. It makes me more present, more grateful, more aware of the miracle, and yes, I think it's a miracle, that humans found a way to bring trees into our homes and turn them into symbols of hope and celebration. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do anything I'm suggesting. But I offer it as an example of how tiny shifts in awareness can change our experience of things we take for granted. The Christmas tree has been teaching humanity the same lessons for thousands of years. Life persists. Light returns. Hope is reasonable. You're not alone. These lessons matter now as much as they ever have, maybe more. We live in uncertain times. Climate change, political division, economic anxiety, social upheaval. The world feels unstable in ways it hasn't in generations, and in times like these, symbols matter, rituals matter. The small practices that remind us we're part of something larger, something older, something that has survived before and will survive again. The Christmas tree is one of those practices. It's not the only one, it's not even necessary, but it's available, it's here. It's offering what it's always offered. All we have to do is receive it. So as we come to the end of this journey, from ancient winter solstice rituals to your living room today, I want to leave you with one final thought. The Christmas tree is not just a symbol of Christmas past. It's a symbol of Christmas future. Every year we have the opportunity to make this tradition new again, to adapt it, to question it, to improve it, to personalize it, to share it, to strip away what doesn't serve us and strengthen what does, to honor the past while creating the future. That's the gift the Christmas tree gives us. Not just beauty or nostalgia or holiday cheer, though it gives all those things, but the gift of participation, the gift of agency, the reminder that traditions aren't fixed and dead. They're living, evolving things that we shape through our choices. You are part of this story now. Your Christmas tree, however you choose to celebrate or not celebrate, is part of this ongoing evolution. What will you make of it? What meaning will you create? What will you pass on to the next generation? These are questions only you can answer. I want to thank you for spending this time with me, for listening to this long, winding journey through history and culture and meaning, for staying present through all 12 parts of this story. I know there are many other things you could have been doing, many other voices competing for your attention, and you chose to be here, to listen, to learn. That matters. That means something. I hope you found something valuable in this exploration, some fact or perspective or idea that will change how you see Christmas trees from now on. Some spark that will make this tradition richer, deeper, more meaningful for you. And if you did, if any of this resonated with you, I'd be honored if you'd share your thoughts. Leave a comment about your own Christmas tree traditions, your memories, your questions, your disagreements even. Because traditions live through conversation, through sharing, through the ongoing dialogue between past and present, between different people and perspectives. This story isn't finished. It's still being written, by all of us. And speaking of stories still being written, this is just one journey among many we're taking together. There are so many more tales to tell, so many more traditions to explore, so many more questions to ask about how we got here and where we're going. So I hope you'll join me again for the next story, the next exploration, the next chance to see the familiar world through fresh eyes. Until then, may your tree, whatever form it takes, bring you light in the darkness. May it remind you of what persists, what endures, what refuses to die even in the coldest winter. May she stand at prayer for you, and may you find, in her green branches and glowing lights, a reminder of your own resilience, your own capacity for hope, your own place in this long, beautiful, complicated story of human beings trying to survive and thrive and create meaning in an uncertain world. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time.